Memory identity paradox. Imagine waking up one morning with no memories at all. No name, no past, no familiar faces, just a blank mind housed in a body you don't recognize. The world around you continues as if nothing has changed, but inside, a profound question begins to echo. If I remember nothing of who I was, am I still me? This haunting scenario is not just the plot of a movie, it's the very heart of one of the most puzzling identity paradoxes in philosophy. The memory identity paradox. This dilemma forces us to reconsider everything we take for granted about our sense of self. If all that we are is tied to what we remember, what becomes of us when those memories vanish or become distorted? Philosopher John Locke argued centuries ago that personal identity is rooted in memory. According to him, if you can remember doing something, then you are the same person who did it. Memory becomes the thread that binds the present self to the past self. If you remember being the child who ran through the fields or the teenager who stayed up reading until dawn, then you are, in Locke's eyes, still that person. It is not the body or even the soul that secures identity through time, but the continuity of memory. The appeal of this view is obvious. We instinctively define ourselves by our memories, our first love, our most embarrassing moment, our proudest achievement. Our narrative is stitched from these recollections, and without them, the story of me starts to unravel. But is memory a reliable tether to our true identity? Thomas Reid, a fellow philosopher and critic of Locke, presented a famous thought experiment to challenge this idea. He imagined a brave officer who, in his youth, was flogged at school. Later, as a soldier, he remembered that punishment. Then, in old age, he recalled his glory on the battlefield, but could no longer remember the flogging. According to Locke's theory, the officer was the same person as the boy, and the general was the same person as the officer. But if the general no longer remembered the boy, then by Locke's logic, he was not the same person as the boy, despite the transitive link. This contradiction reveals a critical flaw in the idea that memory alone constitutes identity. If identity depends on memory, and memory fades or skips stages, then who are we really? This is where the paradox intensifies. Our memories are not perfect archives. They are edited, updated, and sometimes invented. False memories can feel as real as true ones. People have recalled entire events that never happened and have done so with absolute certainty. If memory is prone to such distortions, can it really serve as the foundation of our identity? If a person believes wholeheartedly that they experienced something, does that belief make it part of who they are, even if it's false? Conversely, if we forget something crucial, like a traumatic event or a formative relationship, does that part of us simply cease to exist? Are we less ourselves because we no longer carry that memory? Consider the case of someone with severe amnesia. They wake up not knowing who they are, where they've been, or what they've done. In such cases, their personality might remain intact, their mannerisms, preferences, or emotional reactions may still feel familiar to others. But the person inside feels alien. The internal continuity is broken. So, is that person a new being? Reborn in the same body but severed from the past? Or are they still the same, only hidden beneath the fog of lost memories? The paradox lies in the fact that their identity is both intact and disrupted at once, continuing in some ways, dissolved in others. Neuroscience has offered intriguing insights into this puzzle, but it hasn't resolved it. Brain injuries, degenerative diseases, or trauma can alter memories, delete them, or even create new false ones. Yet the individual often remains recognizable. They may have no idea who their spouse is, yet still behave with kindness or affection. Their behaviors and reactions can mirror old patterns, even as their mind draws a blank. This raises another question. Is identity more than memory? Could it be rooted in unconscious processes, emotional patterns, or something deeper than cognition? Perhaps memory is just one layer in a more complex mosaic of the self. Think about how your sense of self changes over time. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. Your thoughts, values, and habits have evolved, yet you still feel like you. Even if you no longer remember the details of a certain birthday or vacation, you don't feel any less yourself for forgetting. This suggests that while memory contributes to identity, it may not be the sole component. There may be a deeper, more persistent core beneath the shifting sands of memory, a kind of existential fingerprint that endures through change and forgetfulness alike. But what if your memories were replaced entirely? Suppose science could transplant a complete set of memories into your brain, memories of another person's life. You'd wake up with someone else's childhood, experiences, and traumas vividly etched into your mind. From your perspective, you would believe you were that person. Your sense of self would be shaped by those memories. Would you now be that person, or would you still be you, just confused? This hypothetical scenario highlights the disturbing fluidity of identity when memory becomes a mutable element. It suggests that identity, like memory, may not be a fixed truth, but a story told by the brain, a story that can be edited, rewritten, or erased entirely. Philosophers and psychologists continue to debate the extent to which memory defines the self. Some argue for a broader psychological continuity that includes not just memory, but also intentions, beliefs, and desires. In this view, even if memories are lost, a person's consistent patterns of thought and behavior can preserve identity. Others argue for bodily continuity. If the body persists, so does the person. Still others turn to the idea of the soul or consciousness, an unchanging core that remains untouched by memory's flaws. Each theory offers a different way out of the paradox, but none fully resolves it. The conflict remains alive. If memory is central to identity, then identity is inherently unstable, fragile, and reversible. This paradox matters deeply in real life. Think of Alzheimer's disease, where memory is slowly erased like ink fading from a journal. Loved ones watch as a familiar personality slips away, replaced by confusion, repetition, and silence. The question looms painfully: is the person still there? Are they still mom or dad or grandpa, or have they already gone, leaving only a body behind? The memory-identity paradox turns from a philosophical curiosity to an emotional crisis. It forces families, caregivers, and patients themselves to grapple with what it means to still be you in the absence of memory. In literature and film, this theme recurs again and again. From characters with amnesia in thrillers to science fiction stories of memory implants and erasure, we are fascinated by the idea that we could cease to be ourselves without ever dying. These stories resonate because they tap into our deepest fear, not the loss of life, but the loss of self. We fear becoming strangers to our own minds more than we fear physical death. The idea that I could vanish while the body continues walking, talking, and smiling is more terrifying than any ghost or monster. Yet perhaps there is a strange freedom in this paradox too. If identity is fluid, shaped by memory and narrative, then we have some power to reshape it. People who reinvent themselves after trauma or addiction often speak of becoming someone new. They choose a new identity, not based on who they were, but on who they wish to be. In this light, memory becomes a tool, not a chain. The past does not have to dictate the future. The self can be reimagined, reauthored, redefined. The paradox that troubles philosophers may offer hope to those who wish to begin again. Still, the question lingers in quiet moments. If you woke up tomorrow with no memories, just a name, a body, and a blank slate, would you still be you? Or would you be someone new, someone starting from scratch in the same vessel? The memory identity paradox offers no definitive answer, but it asks a question that echoes through our entire lives. What truly makes you, you? Is it your memories, your actions, your relationships, your body, your soul, or something more elusive, a flicker of continuity in the chaos of experience? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one thread, but in recognizing that identity is a tapestry. Memory is one strand, yes, vital and vibrant, but it weaves together with emotion, will, desire, belief, and presence. To lose a strand is not to unravel the entire self, but when too many are lost or tangled, we feel that sense of self begin to flicker. In that fragile space, the memory identity paradox lives, not to torment us, but to remind us how miraculous it is that we feel like anyone at all. The mask paradox. We all wear masks, not the kind worn at costume parties, nor the ones required during a global crisis. These masks are subtle, psychological, and deeply woven into the fabric of our daily lives. We wear them when we greet our neighbors with a polite smile. We wear them in meetings when we nod in agreement, even if we silently disagree. We wear them in friendships, relationships, and even when we're alone, rehearsing the self we plan to present to others. The mask paradox is the strange dilemma that arises when the persona we show to the world becomes so convincing, so rehearsed, that we begin to wonder, is the mask still a mask? Or has it become me? The paradox begins with something very human, the desire to be accepted, to fit in, to be liked. From a young age, we learn what behaviors are rewarded, what traits earn approval, and what parts of ourselves are better kept hidden. So we begin to shape a version of ourselves that the world wants to see. Maybe we present as confident when we feel uncertain. Maybe we act agreeable when we're conflicted. Maybe we pretend to be interested when we're bored, or happy when we're hurting. At first, the mask is a choice. It's something we put on, like a costume. But over time, it becomes less clear whether we're still wearing the mask or if the mask has fused with our face. This is the heart of the mask paradox. When does performance become identity? If you've spent years acting strong, calm, or in control, even when you didn't feel that way, do you eventually become that person? Or are you simply lost beneath the layers of your own invention? And if no one ever sees the real you, does the real you still exist? It's easy to think of the mask as deception, but often the mask isn't worn out of dishonesty. It's worn for survival, for protection. It helps us navigate social expectations, power dynamics, and fragile relationships. It helps us avoid judgment, criticism, or conflict. Sometimes the mask protects others too. We smile so our loved ones don't worry. We act cheerful so we don't bring others down. In many ways, the mask is a kindness. But the paradox emerges when the kindness begins to smother authenticity. When the face we show the world becomes a wall we can't take down, even when we want to. Think of the high achiever who's always poised, always perfect, always composed. Inside, they may be battling imposter syndrome, exhaustion, or fear of failure, but the world sees only excellence. Over time, the pressure to maintain that image becomes a prison. If they ever reveal their fatigue, people might say, "But you're always so strong." The mask has become an expectation, and the more others believe in the mask, the harder it becomes to remove. Now imagine someone who wears a mask of humor. They make others laugh. They deflect pain with jokes. Their lightheartedness is infectious. But inside, they may be carrying immense sadness. They've learned that laughter gets applause, while tears bring discomfort. So the mask stays on, even when their heart is breaking. The paradox deepens. The more convincing the mask, the more invisible the truth. This dilemma raises a difficult question. Is authenticity always better? If a mask helps you function, if it shields you from pain, if it enables social harmony, is it wrong to wear it? Perhaps not. But the paradox lies in what we lose when we forget the difference between who we are and who we pretend to be. We start to feel hollow, disconnected, adrift. We may be surrounded by people, yet feel completely unseen. Because they don't love us, they love the mask, and we help them do it. Over time, we might even forget what lies beneath. If you've spent years being the responsible one, the funny one, the strong one, or the quiet one, you may begin to believe that's all you are. The mask fuses with the skin. You look in the mirror and see only what others expect to see. But every now and then, late at night or in a moment of stillness, the inner self stirs. It whispers, "I'm still here." And that whisper can be terrifying, because now you must ask, if I took off the mask, would anyone recognize me? Would anyone stay? This paradox is especially painful in relationships. We fall in love with personas, projected versions of people. We say we want honesty and vulnerability, but we often respond to them with discomfort. So people learn to keep the mask on, even in intimacy. They become actors in their own lives, delivering the lines others want to hear. And when the cracks begin to show, when the truth slips out in a moment of fatigue or anger or sorrow, the mask wearer often feels shame. "I wasn't myself," they say. But what if that moment, the unfiltered raw moment, was the real self? And yet we cannot live maskless all the time. Society would collapse if we all expressed every raw thought or emotion the moment we felt it. The mask is also a social lubricant. It smooths over awkwardness, keeps the peace, helps us adapt. So the paradox isn't simply about removing the mask, it's about knowing when it's safe to take it off, when to be fully seen, when to say, "This is me, not the performance," and finding those moments is rare and precious. There's also the danger of reverse masking, believing that the version of you without a mask is somehow more real and therefore more valuable. But the truth is more nuanced. The mask you wear to navigate the world is also you. It's the you that survives, that endures, that succeeds. It's the you that knows how to adapt, to protect, to thrive. Just because it's crafted doesn't mean it's false. The mask paradox, then, is not about choosing one self over another. It's about acknowledging the tension between them and learning to live with both. In literature, the mask often symbolizes identity, transformation, or even power. From Shakespeare's comedies to modern psychological thrillers, the mask conceals and reveals. Characters hide their true intentions, but they also discover truths they couldn't face without disguise. And in our own lives, the mask can do the same. Sometimes we need the mask to become who we want to be. Confidence can be faked until it becomes real. Strength can be performed until it takes root. In this way, the mask is not just a shield, it can be a mirror, a doorway, a tool. But problems arise when the mask becomes permanent, when it starts to suffocate rather than support, when you can no longer tell whether your smile is genuine or just reflex, when silence replaces honesty, when the fear of rejection is stronger than the desire to be understood. That's when the mask becomes a cage, and the only way out is vulnerability, one of the scariest but most liberating choices a person can make. Vulnerability doesn't mean removing the mask for everyone. It means finding a space, a person, a journal, a quiet moment where the private self can breathe, where you can say what you really feel without rehearsing it first, where you can admit that you're tired, confused, or afraid, where you can be a human being, not a performance. These moments might be rare, but they are real, and in those moments, the paradox loosens its grip. You begin to realize that you are not either the mask or the self beneath. It's all you, every layer. Some people find healing by slowly aligning their public self with their private self. They start saying no more often. They speak honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. They cry when they need to. They laugh without worrying how it looks. This doesn't mean they abandon the mask entirely, but they choose when to wear it. They take back control. And in doing so, they begin to feel whole again. So the next time you smile when you feel sad, ask yourself gently, am I protecting myself or am I hiding? When you nod along in agreement but feel a scream inside, ask, is this who I am or who I think I need to be? And when you look in the mirror, don't just search for the truth beneath the mask. See the mask too. See its purpose. See its strength. But know that you are more than it. The mask paradox will never fully resolve because we are complex beings in a complex world. But it can soften. It can shift from a burden to a balance. You can learn to carry both truth and presentation, both vulnerability and composure. You can live as someone who wears masks, but never forgets the face beneath. The Doppelgänger Dilemma? Imagine walking down a quiet street at dusk. The air is still, the light is soft, and you're lost in thought, until you see someone across the road who makes your heart stop. They look just like you. Not just a vague resemblance or similar fashion sense, but your exact face, your posture, even your walk. They glance your way with recognition, and for a moment, it feels as if the world has folded in on itself. This is the core of the Doppelgänger Dilemma, a haunting paradox that asks, if someone else looks exactly like you, acts like you, even thinks like you, are they still not you? The word doppelganger comes from German, meaning double walker. Historically, it has been cloaked in superstition. In folklore, meeting your doppelganger was seen as a bad omen, a sign of death or misfortune. But behind the myth lies a deeper, more philosophical riddle. What defines you, and how fragile is your uniqueness if it can be duplicated? The Doppelgänger Dilemma challenges the idea of identity itself, calling into question the boundaries between self and other, original and copy, reality and reflection. At first glance, the answer might seem simple. Of course, your doppelganger isn't you. There's someone else who merely looks like you. But the unease of this scenario doesn't come from logic. It comes from intuition. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing a mirror image of yourself moving independently in the world. You begin to wonder, if someone else can look like me, behave like me, even be mistaken for me, what exactly makes me me? This dilemma becomes even more complex when we consider the idea of psychological doppelgangers, people who not only resemble us physically, but who share our mannerisms, preferences, fears, and thoughts. Imagine meeting someone who finishes your sentences, who reacts to situations just as you would, who holds the same beliefs and memories. Are they your twin in spirit? Or do they threaten the very foundation of your identity? The paradox isn't just about physical likeness. It's about the eerie possibility that you are not as singular as you believe. In modern psychology and philosophy, this dilemma touches on the concept of personal continuity. We assume we are unique because our experience of life feels inward, personal, and unrepeatable. But if another person could replicate that experience, if they could walk through the world with your memories, thoughts, and emotions, then what separates their identity from yours? The fear behind the doppelganger isn't that someone looks like you. It's that someone might be you in every way that matters. Science fiction often plays with this idea. Clones, androids, and parallel universe versions of ourselves are all modern twists on the doppelganger myth. These stories fascinate us because they force us to confront the question, is identity tied to a specific body or to consciousness itself? And if consciousness can be copied, if a machine or another body can carry your mind, your thoughts, your essence, then does that new entity become you? Or is it simply a copy with its own claim to reality? This question lies at the heart of thought experiments like the teletransportation paradox. Imagine stepping into a machine that scans your body and mind, breaks you down molecule by molecule, and recreates you perfectly on the other side of the world. Every cell, every neuron, every memory, identical. The original you is destroyed in the process. The recreated you steps out and continues life, believing it's the same person. But is it really you, or just a convincing copy? The doppelganger, in this case, is not someone you meet on the street. It's someone created from you, yet who now exists independently. The eerie power of the doppelganger comes from its ability to destabilize our sense of self. We build our identities on the assumption that we are continuous, irreplaceable, and distinct. We tell ourselves that our experiences, our inner voice, our consciousness make us who we are. But the doppelganger calls that into question. It suggests that identity might be more malleable, more replicable than we like to admit. And if someone else can be you in any meaningful sense, then what anchors your individuality? This leads to a deeper, more psychological version of the dilemma. What if you become your own doppelganger? What if, through time, trauma, or change, you feel estranged from your former self? You look at old photos and barely recognize the person in them. You hear stories about your past and feel as though they belong to someone else. In this way, the doppelganger isn't a stranger. It's your memory, your ghost, your discarded identity walking beside you. And the paradox deepens. If you are no longer who you were, then who are you now? This internal doppelganger can be just as haunting as the external one. We all contain multitudes, versions of ourselves shaped by time, place, and experience. Sometimes these versions coexist peacefully. Other times they clash. You might feel torn between the person you show to the world and the one you keep hidden, or between who you want to be and who you've become. In those moments, it feels as if two selves are living in one body, each questioning the other's legitimacy. And that, too, is a doppelganger dilemma. Literature and film have long explored these themes. In Dostoevsky's The Double, a man meets a copy of himself who slowly begins to replace him in life and love. In movies like Enemy or Use, the appearance of a lookalike forces characters to confront buried truths about who they are and what they fear. These stories unsettle us not because the copy is monstrous, but because it's familiar. The horror lies not in the other. It lies in the recognition of the self. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the doppelganger paradox is not the copy. It's the possibility that there is no original. If identity can be mirrored, replicated, and changed, then maybe the idea of a stable self is an illusion. Maybe we are not fixed beings but ongoing processes, shifting configurations of memory, biology, and environment. In that view, the doppelganger is not an imposter. It's just another version of the same unfolding process. And that realization, while disturbing, can also be liberating. Because if the self is fluid, then we are not bound by a rigid identity. We are not trapped in the past. We can grow, change, reinvent. The presence of a doppelganger, real or imagined, doesn't erase us. It challenges us to define ourselves more deeply, more deliberately. It pushes us to ask, what do I believe? What do I value? What makes me feel alive? These questions don't find easy answers, but they guide us toward a more grounded sense of who we are, not in contrast to a copy, but in alignment with our core. The Doppelgänger Dilemma is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror to be studied. It reflects our fears, our doubts, our longing to be seen as unique and irreplaceable. It reminds us that identity is both delicate and resilient. We may see others who resemble us or even feel ourselves splintering into different selves over time, but beneath it all, there remains a thread of awareness, a quiet presence that says, I am. And that presence cannot be duplicated, not truly. It is yours, and yours alone. So, the next time you feel like a stranger to yourself, or you meet someone who feels eerily familiar, pause for a moment. Let the paradox in. Let it remind you that you are not a static image, not a singular self trapped in time. You are a constellation of experiences, shifting and shining in ways no replica ever could. And in that constellation, the light of your true self continues, unrepeatable, undefinable, and beautifully real. The mirror test paradox. It begins with a glance. You're standing before a mirror, brushing your hair or adjusting your clothes, when you pause. For a fleeting second, something shifts. You're no longer just looking at your reflection. You're watching someone who looks like you, moves like you, but feels strangely separate. A sliver of distance creeps in. That's me, you think. But then again, is it really? The mirror test paradox begins here. In this ordinary moment, turned extraordinary. Asking a simple question that unlocks a philosophical riddle. When you see yourself in the mirror, what exactly are you seeing? And who, or what, is looking back? The paradox takes its name from the famous psychological experiment known as the mirror test. Developed by Gordon Gallup in the 1970s, the test was designed to measure self-recognition in animals. A mark is placed on the animal's body where it can only be seen in a mirror, say, on the forehead. If the animal looks in the mirror and touches the mark, it suggests a sense of self-awareness. Only a handful of species pass this test: great apes, dolphins, elephants, magpies, and some humans after a certain age. The mirror, it seems, becomes a portal to the self, but only if the mind behind the eyes is conscious of its own existence. Humans, of course, pass the mirror test with ease, usually by the age of 2. But the paradox doesn't end there. In fact, it only begins, because as we grow older, the mirror does more than reflect our physical appearance. It reflects our identity, our age, our emotions, our social presentation. It becomes not just a glass surface, but a philosophical battleground. When you stare into the mirror, what are you really observing? A face? A mask? A persona you've shaped over years? Or is the mirror reflecting something deeper, something closer to your soul? The paradox deepens when we realize that what we see in the mirror is not what others see. The reflection is reversed. Your left is right. Your right is left. The person in the mirror is familiar but flipped, slightly off, never quite real. And yet we trust it. We accept it as us. But this acceptance is fragile. Have you ever seen yourself in an unexpected reflection, caught off guard by a photo, a security camera, or a mirror from an odd angle, and felt momentarily startled, as if seeing yourself for the first time and not liking what you see? That dissonance, that jolt, is the mirror test paradox in motion. Because what the mirror reflects is not just a body, it's a story. A story about who you think you are. Every wrinkle, every shadow, every smile is filtered through layers of memory, emotion, and expectation. Some people look in the mirror and feel a surge of pride. Others feel discomfort, sadness, or even disgust. The reflection doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the full truth either. It's filtered not through glass, but through perception. What we see is shaped by how we feel about ourselves, and that can change from one day to the next. This leads to the central dilemma. Is the self you see in the mirror your true self, or just a version shaped by self-image, social feedback, and mental narrative? The paradox asks whether self-awareness is the same as self-knowledge. You may recognize your own reflection, but do you know who you are? You may see your face, but can you see your essence, your beliefs, your fears, your longings? Or are those things forever hidden, even from your own gaze? Psychologists have long studied the role of the mirror in identity formation. From adolescence onward, mirrors become tools of social calibration. We check them before job interviews, before dates, before stepping on stage. We want to ensure that what we present matches what we intend. But even this act, this attempt to appear as we wish, is layered with paradox. Because the self we're trying to fix in the mirror is never fully visible. The mirror cannot show our voice, our gestures, our scent, or the energy we give off in a room. It shows the shell, the surface, and yet we treat it as the whole. In certain psychological conditions, the mirror becomes a site of deep distress. People with body dysmorphic disorder may see flaws that don't exist. Others may feel disconnected from their reflection entirely, a condition called mirror self-misidentification. For some, it triggers derealization, where reality itself begins to feel unreal. These cases expose a truth that lurks beneath the surface. Our relationship with the mirror is never neutral. It is charged with emotion, memory, and narrative. The reflection is static, but the meaning we attach to it is constantly shifting. There's also a curious experience many people report: standing in front of a mirror for too long, staring into their own eyes, and beginning to feel a strange sense of dissociation. The features blur. The face feels unfamiliar. Something ancient and uncanny stirs. Psychologists call this the strange face illusion, and it reveals just how slippery our self-image really is. The longer we stare, the more our mind tries to make sense of what it sees, and sometimes it fails. The familiar becomes foreign. The known becomes unknown. The mirror becomes a mystery. This experience is intensified when paired with a deeper philosophical question: who is doing the looking? You look at yourself, but what part of you is observing? The eyes see, but who sees the seeing? This recursive loop creates an existential echo. The self is both subject and object, the one who looks and the one who is looked at. You are the observer and the observer. But can one ever fully grasp the other? Or are we forever divided, trapped between the reflection and the reality? In some Eastern philosophies, the mirror is used as a metaphor for consciousness itself. Zen Buddhism, for instance, often speaks of the mind as a mirror, able to reflect reality clearly when calm, but easily clouded by emotion and thought. The paradox here is that in seeking to know the self, we must clear the mirror of the self. We must stop trying to see and instead be. In this sense, the mirror becomes not a tool of self-obsession, but of self-transcendence. The image in the mirror is not you, but a temporary form, a passing appearance, a costume worn by consciousness. And yet, in everyday life, we cannot escape the mirror. It greets us in bathrooms, in shop windows, in rear-view mirrors and digital screens. It reminds us constantly that we are bodies moving through space, aging, changing, vulnerable. It forces us to reconcile our internal self with our external appearance. Some days we smile at the reflection, other days we look away. But in both moments, the mirror holds its silence, showing only what we bring to it. Artists and writers have long been drawn to the mirror as a symbol. Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass imagines a world where everything is reversed, where logic is twisted and identity is fluid. Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray explores the horror of a man whose outer beauty remains while peasant. In these stories, the mirror is never just a tool, it is a threshold, a test, a trap. It lures us in with the promise of recognition, only to challenge our sense of who we really are. But maybe the mirror's gift is not certainty, but curiosity. Maybe its paradox is not a puzzle to be solved, but an invitation to look deeper, not just at the face we present to the world, but at the stories, beliefs, and questions we carry within. Maybe the mirror shows us that we are not finished, not fixed, not fully known. We are becoming, changing, reflecting and refracting moment by moment. So the next time you stand before a mirror, take a breath. Look into your own eyes, not with judgment, but with wonder. Ask not, do I look good today, but who is this being looking back at me? Ask not, do others see me this way, but do I see myself at all? Let the image soften. Let the roles and labels fall away. And in that stillness, you may catch a glimpse, not just of the face you wear, but of the consciousness behind it. Because the mirror test paradox is not just about self-recognition. It's about the mystery of selfhood. It reminds us that the surface can never fully capture the depths, that we are more than appearances, more than reflections, more than ideas. We are observers of ourselves, dancers in our own shadows, seekers staring into glass, searching for something that no mirror can fully show, yet every mirror dares us to find. Split-brain identity paradox. In the stillness of a hospital room, a surgeon makes a careful incision, reaching toward the corpus callosum, the thick band of neural fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. In patients with severe epilepsy, cutting this connection can reduce the frequency of seizures. The surgery is drastic but effective. The brain remains intact. The person wakes up, speaks, smiles. On the surface, they are the same. But what unfolds in the days and weeks that follow leads to one of the most unsettling paradoxes in neuroscience, the split-brain identity paradox. When the brain is divided, does the self split too? This paradox begins with a simple question that cuts deep. How many minds can live in one head? For most of us, the answer seems obvious. One brain, one mind, one consciousness guiding our thoughts, choices, and actions. But for split-brain patients, those whose left and right hemispheres can no longer communicate, that answer becomes murky. Tests conducted on these individuals reveal something astonishing. Under certain conditions, it appears as if each hemisphere functions independently. Each side can perceive, think, and even respond without the other knowing, as if two minds now inhabit one body. The story of this paradox traces back to the 1960s, when neuroscientists Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga began studying patients who had undergone corpus callosotomy. These individuals looked and behaved normally in most ways. They could walk, talk, read, and socialize. But in controlled experiments, where visual information was presented to only one hemisphere, a strange phenomenon occurred. If a word was shown to the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, the patient often could not say what they saw, but they could draw it with their left hand. The left hemisphere, which governs language, was unaware of what the right hemisphere saw, and yet the right hemisphere had clearly seen it, understood it, and acted on it. In one famous experiment, a split-brain patient was shown two images, one to each hemisphere. A snow scene was shown to the right hemisphere, and a chicken claw to the left. When asked to match pictures with their hands, the left hand pointed to a snow shovel, and the right hand pointed to a chicken. When asked to explain the choice, the patient said, "I saw a chicken claw, so I picked the chicken, and the shovel is for cleaning out the chicken coop." The left hemisphere had no access to the snow scene, yet invented a plausible story to explain the right hand's action. The two halves were no longer exchanging information. Each side had a version of reality, and the left, still dominant in language, filled in the blanks. What this reveals is unsettling. It suggests that each hemisphere has its own stream of consciousness, its own intentions, perceptions, and decisions. If that's true, then who is the real self in a split-brain patient? Is there one unified identity, or two minds, quietly cohabiting a single skull? And if two minds exist, which one speaks for the person? Which one is the person? This is the split-brain identity paradox. If the brain, when severed, can operate as two independent systems, each with its own experiences, then is personal identity an illusion of unity? Is what we call the self simply the result of communication between parts? If those parts stop talking, Do we become two people? Or are we always more than one? The paradox becomes even more intriguing when we realize that each hemisphere specializes in different functions. The left typically handles language, logic, and sequential thinking. The right tends to process spatial awareness, emotional tone, and holistic perception. In a fully connected brain, these functions merge to create a seamless experience, but when divided, they stand apart. A patient might laugh at a joke shown only to the right hemisphere, without being able to explain why. The left brain is confused. The right brain finds it funny. It's as if one self is in on the joke, while the other is left in the dark. This duality challenges the notion of an indivisible I. If your brain can hold two centers of awareness, then what happens to your singular identity? Are you one person with a fractured mind, or two minds sharing one history, one name, one body? Some philosophers argue that identity is tied to psychological continuity. If each hemisphere can think, choose, and act independently, then perhaps each is its own person. But this conclusion is disturbing. It implies that identity is not only divisible, it's conditional. Imagine waking up after split brain surgery. You feel fine. You speak normally. You recognize your loved ones. But quietly, deep inside, two currents begin to flow. One side of you reaches for something while the other hesitates. One half understands the words on the page, while the other responds to the emotion in a voice. If you had a secret known only to the right hemisphere, could the left side lie about it? Would one side betray the other? Could each hemisphere have its own goals, its own morality, its own soul? This idea borders on science fiction, yet it is grounded in clinical reality. In some rare cases, split brain patients have exhibited behaviors that seem to reflect internal conflict. One hand buttons a shirt while the other unbuttons it. One hand reaches for a task the other resists. These moments don't occur constantly, but they raise unsettling questions. Are these isolated malfunctions of coordination, or glimpses into a deeper schism? A silent conversation between two selves, now cut off from each other, yet still struggling to coexist. But if that's true, then what does it mean for the rest of us? For those with intact brains, does the illusion of unity simply come from the connection between parts? Are we unified only because our brain hemispheres are in constant dialogue? And if so, is our sense of self just the echo of that dialogue? An emergent story told by the brain to make sense of its own complexity. This brings us to the narrative self, the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The left hemisphere, with its command of language, often serves as the brain's storyteller. When it lacks information, it makes assumptions. It fills in gaps. It spins narratives. In split brain patients, this storytelling becomes more apparent. The left hemisphere, unaware of the right's experience, still offers explanations, even if they're inaccurate. And we all do this, creating coherence from fragments, shaping identity from memory, emotion, and interpretation. But if our sense of self is just a story, a convenient fiction crafted by neurons, then what anchors us? What keeps us whole? The split-brain identity paradox suggests that identity is not a solid object, but a fragile web woven by communication. Cut the threads, and the self splinters. Leave them intact, and the illusion of unity holds. But even in intact minds, the tension remains. We all have conflicting thoughts, mixed feelings, internal debates. Maybe the split brain simply reveals what was always there: divided desires, overlapping selves, simultaneous truths. Some philosophers suggest that the mind is not one self, but many, a multiplicity of selves working together. You are the thinker, the feeler, the planner, the dreamer, the critic. You are parent and child, sage and fool, all sharing one frame. In this view, the unity of self is not a given, it is an achievement, a balance struck between opposing forces. The paradox is not that two minds can exist in one body, but that one mind ever feels singular at all. And yet, there is something profoundly human about seeking unity. We long to feel whole. We yearn for coherence. Even when our thoughts contradict, Even when our actions betray our ideals, we strive to say, "This is me." We build identities not because they are simple, but because they help us navigate complexity. The split-brain identity paradox doesn't destroy the self. It invites us to understand it more deeply, to see it not as a fixed point, but as a dynamic process, a conversation, a dance between hemispheres, between thoughts, between parts. So the next time you feel conflicted, when part of you wants to stay and part of you wants to run, pause. Feel the split, the tension, the quiet war within. Don't rush to resolve it. Let it teach you. Let it reveal the vastness of your own mind. You are not broken for having contradictions. You are not less for being divided. You are a cathedral of selves, each voice echoing through the halls of your brain, each one adding to the music of who you are. The split-brain identity paradox is not a failure of science. It is a mirror held up to the soul. It shows us that identity is not an object to possess, but a mystery to explore. We are not one thing or even two. We are many woven together by memory, meaning, and awareness. And in that complexity, in that shimmering paradox, we find something that feels like truth. Not the certainty of I am one, but the beauty of I am many, held together by wonder. The narrative identity illusion. You are the story you tell yourself, or at least, that's what it feels like. From early childhood, you begin to craft a narrative, first shaped by others, then gradually taken over by your own voice. You remember certain moments. You give them meaning. You link them together like scenes in a movie, tying them with cause and effect, growth and struggle, triumph and loss. This is who I am, you say, pointing to those memories, those turning points, those values. The story becomes your identity. But what if that story is a fiction? What if the self it describes doesn't exist in the way you believe it does? This is the essence of the narrative identity illusion, the haunting possibility that your identity is not a truth, but a tale. The illusion is seductive because it offers comfort. Life is chaotic. Experiences are messy. The human mind craves order, coherence, explanation. So we shape the past into something that feels linear. We explain who we are by pointing to where we've been. Why do you fear abandonment? Because of that breakup in college. Why do you strive for success? Because you want to prove someone wrong. Every trait, every flaw, every dream is assigned an origin. Like a novelist, your mind fills in character arcs and themes, trying to make sense of the unrelenting present by crafting a story around it. Psychologists call this narrative identity, the internalized, evolving story of the self that gives life a sense of unity and purpose. It's the reason you can say, "I've always been this way," or "I used to be like that, but I changed." The narrative connects who you were to who you are to who you're becoming. It allows you to believe there's a single thread running through time, anchoring you. But here's the paradox. That thread may be woven not from truth, but from memories, illusions, emotional coloring, and retroactive storytelling. The self you narrate may never have truly existed. Because memory is not a perfect recording. It is reconstruction. Every time you recall a moment, you are not retrieving a static file, you are rebuilding it, reshaping it. Details are forgotten, replaced, rearranged. We are not historians of the self, we are editors. We revise our story as we grow. We delete scenes that no longer fit the plot. We reinterpret old events to justify who we've become. This editing isn't dishonest. It's human. But it means that the story of you is always in flux, and possibly always partly false. Even more unsettling is how easily our narrative can change based on mood. When we're hopeful, our past feels like a journey of growth. When we're depressed, it feels like a series of failures. The same facts support radically different stories, depending on how we feel when we're telling them. This reveals a troubling truth. Identity is not fixed. It's fluid, it's reactive. It's shaped not only by what happened, but by how we choose to frame it today. And if the story can change, then what does that say about the self it claims to describe? We also tell different stories to different people. To a friend, you might play the role of the resilient survivor. To a therapist, the wounded child. To a colleague, the professional achiever. Each version has truth in it. But which one is you? Or are all of them partial truths, stitched together to meet the expectations of different audiences? The paradox is that while the narrative gives us a sense of wholeness, it also reveals our fragmentation. The more we examine the story, the more we see how tailored it is, how performed, how strategic, how constructed. This illusion runs deeper than we think. Some philosophers argue that the self is not just described by narrative, it is narrative. That there is no core you underneath the story, only the story itself. That identity is an ongoing act of narration, and when the story stops, when memory fades, when language breaks down, so does the self. This view is both liberating and terrifying. If the self is a story, then we can rewrite it. But it also means there's no solid ground beneath us. Just words. Just shifting meaning. Consider how often people reinvent themselves. After trauma. After moving to a new city. After a relationship ends. They say, "That's not me anymore," or "I had to find myself." What they often mean is that the old story stopped serving them, and they needed a new one. But was the old story ever true? Or was it simply one version of many, temporarily accepted as fact? If we can change our identity with a shift in perspective, then maybe the self is not something we are, but something we do. This becomes especially clear in moments of deep disruption. Illness, loss, or crisis can shatter the narrative. Suddenly, the plot doesn't make sense. The character you thought you were no longer fits the role. In these moments, people often say, "I don't know who I am anymore." It's not that they've lost their mind, it's that the story collapsed. And without a story, the self feels like a ghost. But over time, new stories emerge, new explanations, a new sense of meaning, and slowly, the illusion of coherence returns, different, but no less fragile. Even spiritual experiences echo this paradox. Mystics and meditators sometimes report a dissolution of identity, a state where the narrative self disappears, and what remains is pure awareness. No name, no history, no personality. In those moments, the self feels like an illusion, a mask dropped away. And yet, when the experience ends, the story resumes. The ego reconstructs itself, saying, "That was incredible," and folds the experience back into its narrative arc. Even the escape from story becomes a story. This reveals something profound. We are addicted to narrative. It gives us continuity. It gives us reason. It gives us identity. But it also traps us. It limits who we believe we can be. It defines us by the past, even when the past no longer defines our reality. We become attached to versions of ourselves that no longer serve us, afraid to let go of the story, because we fear that without it, we would disappear. But what if the illusion is not something to fear, but something to use wisely? What if knowing the self as a story allows us to choose which story to tell, not in a deceptive way, but in a creative, intentional way? If we are the authors of our identity, then we are not bound by the past. We are not trapped by old roles, old wounds, old narratives. We can revise. We can reframe. We can find meaning not in what happened, but in how we tell it. This doesn't mean we abandon truth. It means we recognize that truth is multifaceted, that our memories are lenses, not windows, that our identity is a garden of perspectives, each one capable of blooming or withering depending on how we tend it. The narrative identity illusion reminds us not to cling too tightly to any single version of ourselves, to leave room for growth, for contradiction, for evolution. So when you say, "This is who I am," pause. Ask yourself, is this story helping me or limiting me? Is it rooted in who I was or who I want to become? Am I holding on to it out of fear or out of choice? These questions won't erase the illusion, but they will give you agency within it. They will remind you that your story is not your prison, it's your palette. In the end, maybe the self is not a thing to find, but a tale to tell. And in telling it, you are never finished, never final. always writing, always rewriting. The narrative identity illusion doesn't mean you are nothing. It means you are possibility, fluid, unfolding, alive. The illusion of continuity. You wake up in the morning and stretch your limbs. You recognize your hands. Your thoughts return. Your memories follow. You brush your teeth the same way, reach for the same cup of coffee, greet the same people in the same tone. Everything feels familiar, including yourself. You are unmistakably you. And not just today, but yesterday, and the day before, and last year. You remember what you did in school. You remember your childhood bedroom. You believe that the self you are now is the same self who lived those moments. You feel continuous. But what if that sense of continuity is an illusion? This is the heart of the illusion of continuity, the haunting paradox that the self we believe stretches through time like a thread may, in fact, be a series of disjointed moments stitched together by memory and imagination. That the you who went to sleep last night is not quite the same you who woke up today, and that the line you trace back through your life might not be as unbroken as it feels. It's a paradox that questions not whether we exist, but whether we exist as one consistent, unchanging self. We rely on continuity to make sense of life. It's what allows us to take responsibility for our past actions, to plan for the future, to feel accountable for our choices. Continuity lets us build identity, relationships, careers, and legacies. Without it, the world would feel incoherent. If we believed that we were a different person every day, we might lose our sense of morality, of meaning, of memory. So our minds create a story, a consistent I who travels through time. But neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy suggest that this story may not be telling the whole truth. The human brain is not static. It is in constant flux. Neurons are firing, dying, being rewired. Your thoughts, emotions, and even your personality are shaped by hormones, sleep cycles, food, stress, and time. The cells in your body are replaced over and over again. You are not physically the same person you were a decade ago, not even close. And yet you say, that was me. But if every cell has changed, and every belief has evolved, then what remains? What continues? Memory often feels like the glue that holds identity together, but memory is not a perfect historian. It is selective, fragile, reconstructed each time it's recalled. You don't remember your past, you recreate it. And this recreation is influenced by your current emotions, your current beliefs, your current context. In this way, the past self is not simply remembered, it is reinvented. The continuity you feel is not an unbroken line. It's a carefully edited film, spliced together to appear seamless. Consider the experience of waking up after anesthesia. Hours have passed, and you have no memory of them. You didn't cease to exist, but you weren't you in the way you usually are. Or think about deep sleep, where consciousness vanishes, only to return hours later. Who were you in the gap? If the self is continuous, where does it go when it disappears? And if it returns later, is it picking up where it left off, or is it a new version, simply wearing the same name? Split brain experiments offer another crack in the illusion. When the connection between the brain's hemispheres is severed, people begin to show evidence of dual consciousness, two minds operating independently in one body. If unity can be split with a scalpel, was it ever truly unified at all? Is the sense of a single self simply the result of communication between parts? When that communication stops, does continuity unravel? Then there's the ship of Theseus, a thought experiment that asks, if you replace a ship's parts one by one, until none of the original parts remain, is it still the same ship? We often use this metaphor for identity. If all of your cells, thoughts, and beliefs are replaced over time, are you still you? Or are you a copy wearing an old story? The illusion of continuity whispers that nothing has changed, but step back far enough, and everything has. This paradox is not just theoretical. It plays out in everyday life. Think of how much you've changed over the years, what you value, what you fear, how you react. Sometimes we look at old photos and feel like we're staring at a stranger. We remember what they thought, what they hoped, what they didn't know, and we think, I'm not that person anymore. So who were they? And what connects them to you now? The mind stitches continuity out of convenience. The ego wants to believe in a solid, enduring me. It finds stability in sameness, but that sameness may be a narrative trick, a way to manage the chaos of experience. When you reflect on your life, your mind highlights what fits the story. It downplays the rest. It tells you you've always been this way. But if you look closely, you'll see the cracks. You'll see the many selves you've been, the contradictions, the forgotten chapters, the moments that don't belong to the person you think you are. Some traditions embrace this illusion. In Buddhism, the self is seen as impermanent, a bundle of sensations, thoughts, and perceptions constantly arising and fading. There is no fixed core, only a stream. What we call me is like a flame, always flickering, never the same. The illusion of continuity, they say, is the source of suffering. We cling to a false idea of permanence in a world where everything changes. Peace comes not from preserving the self, but from realizing its fluid nature. But even if we accept the illusion, we still have to live inside it. We still have to make choices, form relationships, find meaning. So what do we do with this paradox? Do we abandon the self or hold on to it with humility? Perhaps the answer is to see identity as both fiction and function. The story isn't true in the absolute sense, but it helps us navigate the world. It gives us direction. It helps us grow. The key is not to cling to the story, but to hold it lightly. To know that the you of yesterday was real in that moment, but not in this one. To allow yourself to change, not just slowly over time, but suddenly, radically if needed. To let go of the pressure to be consistent in a world that demands it, and instead become more curious about who you are now. And maybe that's the quiet gift of the illusion. It shows us that identity is not a prison, it's a palette. You are not bound by who you were. You are not chained to old roles, old fears, old scripts. You are a process, not a product. A verb, not a noun. And in that process, you are free to shift, to stretch, to surprise even yourself. So when you say, "This is who I am," pause. Ask yourself, is that a memory speaking? Is that a role being performed? Or is it something alive in this moment, changing with every breath? Maybe the self is not something you carry. It's something you create, moment by moment. And maybe the continuity you feel is not evidence of sameness, but of story. A story written across time to make sense of a fluid, flickering truth. The illusion of continuity is not a flaw. It is part of being human. It allows you to love someone for years, to dream across decades, to feel that your life is your own. But beneath it, there is a deeper stillness, a self beyond self, a consciousness untouched by time, not continuous but constant, not personal but present. And when the story falls silent, when thought ceases and only awareness remains, you may glimpse what lies beyond the illusion. Not the thread, but the space it weaves through. Not the self, but the silence behind it. The paradox of the true self. You've heard the phrase your whole life. Be true to yourself. It's offered as advice, as encouragement, as a mantra. In difficult moments, you're told to listen to your inner voice, to trust your instincts, to reconnect with who you really are. The idea behind these words feels obvious, even sacred, that beneath all the noise of the world, beneath the expectations and the roles and the masks, there is a deeper, authentic self, a real you. But what if that idea, comforting as it is also a paradox? What if the true self you're told to find doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does? What if, in seeking it, you're chasing a mirage? This is the paradox of the true self, a philosophical dilemma that questions whether there is such a thing as an essential, unchanging self at all. It asks, if you are constantly evolving, learning, adapting, and changing, then what remains constant? What part of you can be called true? And if your values, memories, personality, and even desires shift over time, how do you know which version is the real one? Are you more authentic when you follow your past, or when you embrace your present? Many traditions and thinkers have wrestled with this question. In Western thought, the true self is often imagined as something buried beneath the surface. Freud saw it as the unconscious, a collection of repressed desires and drives. Carl Jung called it the self, the integration of both light and shadow, conscious and unconscious. In Eastern philosophy, particularly in Buddhism, the idea is turned on its head. The true self is no self at all. It is the realization that the ego is an illusion, and that freedom lies in letting go of fixed identity. But in everyday life, the true self is often seen as a moral compass. When you feel lost or conflicted, people will say, "Just be yourself," as if there's a stable, authentic version of you hidden underneath the confusion. But which part of you is that? Is it the part that craves safety or the part that longs to explore? Is it the version of you that existed before pain or the one shaped by it? Is it who you are when no one is watching or who you choose to be under pressure? This is where the paradox becomes sharp, because every version of you feels real at the time. The child you were, the teenager you became, the adult you are now, none of them were lies. None of them were fake, but they were different. Your interests changed, your goals changed, your beliefs changed. So if all those selves felt true, then which one was the true self? Some argue that your core self is the one consistent through time. But what if there is no core, just patterns? Some say your true self is revealed when you're most free. But what if freedom shows a different side of you each time? Others believe the true self is who you are when you're alone, unfiltered. But even in solitude, we wear masks, masks of habit, memory, expectation. The paradox deepens when you try to live authentically. How do you know if a choice is authentic? Maybe you feel strongly about something today, but what if you change your mind tomorrow? Was it less true? Or just a different layer of truth? The desire to find yourself is noble, but it assumes that there is a fixed self to find. What if the truth is not buried beneath you, but built as you go? Psychologists suggest that identity is not discovered but constructed. You are not a statue waiting to be uncovered. You are a story, being written in real time. Each decision, each failure, each joy adds a page. And yet, even knowing this, people still long to find the real me. Perhaps because we fear being lost in the noise of the world. We fear becoming someone we're not. But maybe the real danger isn't losing the true self. Maybe it's clinging to a version that no longer fits. This paradox is especially painful during transformation. When you grow out of a relationship, or leave a belief system, or shift your goals, people might say you've changed. As if that's a betrayal. As if being true to who you were means never becoming someone new. But what if your growth is the most authentic thing about you? What if the real you is not a constant, but a capacity? Think of a tree. It changes with the seasons. It grows toward the light. Its leaves fall and return. No one questions whether the tree is being true to itself. Its nature is to change. Maybe we are the same. Maybe authenticity is not about consistency, but about alignment. Not about staying the same, but about being honest with who you are right now, even if that person is different than who you were yesterday. Still, we crave stability. We want to know who we are. We want our friends and family to recognize us. We want to feel at home in our skin. So we build identities: artist, parent, leader, rebel. These labels help us make sense of ourselves, but they also trap us. They make it harder to change. They make us feel like we're betraying something if we evolve. The paradox is that the true self may only emerge when we allow those identities to fall away. This is why some people feel most authentic not when they declare who they are, but when they forget the self entirely. In moments of deep presence, during creativity, service, meditation, or awe, they stop narrating their identity. They stop asking, "Who am I?" and simply experience what is. The paradox is that the true self may be most felt when we stop looking for it. And yet, the search continues. We write memoirs, we take personality tests, we chase clarity. We try to define ourselves in the mirror, in our memories, in the reflections of others. But the more we try to pin it down, the more it slips away. Like chasing your own shadow, like trying to look directly at your own eye. So where does this leave us? If the true self is not fixed, not found, not fully knowable, then what is it? Perhaps it is not a thing to possess, but a relationship to cultivate. Not an essence, but a practice. Not a destination, but a direction. You can live toward your truth, even if you never fully define it. You can act in integrity, even without clarity. You can follow what feels right, even if you don't know where it leads. Maybe the truest version of you is not the one who fits a definition, but the one who keeps asking the question. Not the one who claims to know themselves, but the one who remains open to change. In this way, the paradox becomes a path. It humbles you. It invites curiosity. It invites compassion. It reminds you that everyone around you is also figuring out who they are, moment by moment. So the next time someone says, "Just be yourself," take a breath, smile gently, and ask, which self? The one from yesterday? The one I'm becoming? The one I haven't met yet? Let the question remain unanswered. Let it keep you open. Let it remind you that you are not a fixed point, you are a living, breathing, evolving mystery. And in that mystery, you are always true. The gradual change paradox. Theseus's person. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. You know this. You've seen the shifts in your thinking, your emotions, your habits. Perhaps you've let go of things you used to love. Perhaps you've embraced beliefs that once felt foreign. Even your body has changed, cell by cell. Almost every part of you has been replaced. And yet, despite all this, you say, "I am still me." But what does that really mean? How can you be the same if everything about you has changed? This is the gradual change paradox, often called the Theseus's person paradox. A haunting reflection on identity, time, and the fragile threads of continuity that hold the self together. The paradox originates in ancient philosophy with the famous ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship that, over time, has every one of its planks replaced with new wood. Eventually, none of the original parts remain. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine a different person taking all the old planks and assembling a new ship out of them. Which one, if either, is the real ship of Theseus? Now turn that question inward. You are a ship too, and you are constantly being rebuilt. Your cells regenerate, your memories shift, your beliefs evolve. Slowly, imperceptibly, the parts of you are replaced, until one day you find yourself wondering, am I still the same person I was? And if I'm not, who am I now? We are taught to believe in personal identity as something solid, that there is a stable I inside us that continues through time, unchanged in its essence. It's comforting. It allows us to take responsibility for past actions, to form relationships, to dream of the future. It allows us to love people across years and decades, believing that they too remain themselves. But when you look closer, this certainty begins to dissolve. The paradox lies in the nature of gradual change. If something transforms all at once, we accept it as new. But if it changes slowly, day by day, we often fail to notice. You are not the person you were at 10 years old. But you didn't become your current self overnight. It happened gradually. So where exactly did the change occur? Was there a single moment when the old self ended and the new one began? Or was the change so smooth that no single moment can be called the turning point? This smoothness hides the transformation. It creates the illusion of continuity. And yet, over long enough timelines, the difference becomes undeniable. The you who once feared public speaking may now speak with ease. The you who once dreamed of one life may now pursue another. So which self is real? Are they both you? Or has one replaced the other? Neuroscience doesn't offer easy answers. The brain is plastic, constantly rewiring itself based on experience, habit, and emotion. Memories aren't static records. They're reassembled each time they're recalled. Even personality traits, once thought to be fixed, can shift with time, trauma, or insight. If the self is built from memory, emotion, and habit, and all of those things can change, then what anchors the self? Some suggest continuity of memory is the key. As long as you remember being the earlier version of yourself, you are still the same person. But this too has cracks. People with amnesia can forget their past, yet still feel like themselves. Others may remember perfectly but feel utterly transformed, disconnected from who they were. Is memory enough? Or is there something more fundamental, something deeper? The problem is that we want identity to be both dynamic and stable. We want to grow and change, and still be ourselves. But the paradox asks, at what point does change become replacement? If your beliefs, your dreams, your values, your habits, and your body have all changed, what remains of the original you? Is it just the name? The face? Or is the self nothing more than a narrative, rewritten continuously, like a book with no final chapter? And if so, who is the author? The idea of the self as a narrative helps make sense of the paradox. You are not a fixed object. You are a process. A story unfolding across time. Each moment is a new page, and though the character evolves, the continuity of the story gives the illusion of stability. You look back at earlier chapters and say, that was me, even if today's version of you barely resembles that person. But what if the story changes genre? What if the character becomes unrecognizable? At what point do we say, that's not the same person anymore? Relationships are shaped by this tension. You meet someone, you connect, you grow together or apart, and years later you may look at them and feel a sense of loss. You've changed, you might say, and they may reply, so have you. The bond you shared was built on a version of yourselves that may no longer exist. So do you still love the same person? Or do you love a memory? A shadow? The paradox of gradual change challenges not only how we see ourselves, but how we see others, how we define loyalty, love, and identity through time. Some find this unsettling. They want to believe in a core self, something unchangeable, eternal, untouched by the world. But others find it freeing. If the self is changeable, then it is also renewable. You are not bound by your past. You are not trapped by who you were. You can grow. You can reinvent. You can shed old skin and still say, I am me, because the very act of change is part of what makes you human. Think of nature. A river is never the same twice. Its waters change. Its banks shift. Yet we still call it by one name. Identity, perhaps, is like that. Not fixed, but flowing. Not singular, but continuous. You are a river of experiences, shaped by the terrain you move through, always changing, always becoming. And yet, even rivers have a source. So what, if anything, remains? Some say it is consciousness itself, the awareness behind all the change, the witness, the observer. That part of you that simply knows moment to moment, without judgment. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't cling to a role. It doesn't argue with change, it watches it. And perhaps that silent observer is the thread we're looking for. Not the self that changes, but the space in which change occurs. Or perhaps there is no thread at all, just the illusion of one, crafted by the brain to give meaning to a life in motion. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't need to be the same person you were. Maybe continuity isn't what defines identity. Maybe it's compassion, or curiosity, or presence. Maybe the question isn't, am I still me? But am I living with intention? So next time you look in the mirror and wonder how much you've changed, don't look for sameness. Look for depth. Look for growth. Look for the ways you've stretched beyond who you were. You are not a static structure. You are a ship at sea, rebuilt in storms and sunlight alike. And every plank that's been replaced has taught you something. Every wave has carried you forward. The gradual change paradox doesn't mean you're lost, it means you're alive. You are a process, not a product. And the beauty of that truth is that you don't have to fear becoming someone else, because every version of you is part of the journey. And every version deserves your presence, your care, your respect. The paradox of becoming no one. You are told, from the moment you are born, that you are someone. You are given a name. You are handed an identity. You're praised when you act like yourself and corrected when you stray. Over time, you gather roles: student, sibling, friend, citizen, professional. These roles begin to define you. People form expectations. You begin to form them too. You build a personality, a reputation, a story. You look in the mirror and say, "This is me." But what if the deepest truth about you is not that you are someone, but that you are no one? This is the paradox of becoming no one, the haunting and liberating idea that the truest version of yourself may be the one that drops identity altogether. At first, this sounds like a contradiction. How can not being someone be the truest version of yourself? We are used to thinking that the self is something solid, that your essence is unique, fixed, and deeply personal. But what if the self is not a thing at all? What if it's a process, a mask, a habit of thought that can be unlearned? Across traditions, from Eastern spirituality to modern neuroscience, a quiet voice suggests the self you think you are may be an illusion. In many meditative traditions, the goal is not to perfect the self, but to see through it, to become nobody. Not in the sense of disappearing, but in the sense of letting go of the compulsive need to be someone specific. The ego, the bundle of thoughts, stories, and attachments we call me, is seen not as who we are, but as who we temporarily believe we are. When the ego dissolves, what remains is something more spacious, more peaceful, more present, awareness itself. But here lies the paradox. To become no one, you must still be. You must act, live, breathe. You cannot opt out of life. You cannot float above existence. So how do you navigate the world without identity, without ego, without clinging to the idea of me? How can you be no one and still be fully here? The answer perhaps is in what you let go of. You let go of the need to define yourself constantly, to defend yourself, to prove yourself. You stop narrating every moment. You stop performing. You stop curating a self for others to see. You begin to notice the space between thoughts, the silence beneath your roles. You stop being a character and become the awareness behind the character. But it's not easy. Identity feels safe. Being someone gives you structure. It gives you a place in the world. To abandon it feels like falling, like erasing, like dying. The ego will resist. It will whisper, "If you are no one, you are nothing." But that is fear, not truth. Because in becoming no one, you don't lose awareness, you find it. You don't lose meaning, you become present enough to create it, moment by moment, without clinging. Neuroscience supports some of these insights. Studies show that the brain constructs the self through integration, linking memory, perception, emotion, and behavior. The self is not located in a single part of the brain. It is a network, a system. It emerges. It's useful, but it's not fixed. When parts of the brain are damaged or altered, a person's identity can shift drastically. Preferences change. Memories fade. Behavior transforms. If the self were solid, this would not be possible. But if the self is a construct, then it can dissolve and reassemble without losing consciousness. This is where the paradox shines. You are not your story, but you can tell one. You are not your thoughts, but you can think. You are not your roles, but you can play them. Becoming no one doesn't mean you stop existing. It means you stop confusing the content of your experience with the experiencer itself. You stop clinging to the reflection and return to the mirror. In meditation, there are moments when the inner voice falls silent. No identity, no opinion, no analysis, just stillness. In those moments, you are not a person with a past or a plan. You are just presence. The breath rises and falls. Sound comes and goes. Thought flickers and fades. You are not doing anything. You are not trying to be anything. You are simply aware. And in that space, something profound emerges, peace. Not because you've solved life, but because for a moment you've stopped needing to. But this state doesn't mean you forget how to function. On the contrary, it frees you to function more clearly. When you are not constantly worried about protecting the image of yourself, you can respond instead of react. You can listen deeply, love fully, act wisely. Becoming no one removes the filter of ego, and what remains is clarity, compassion, stillness in motion. The world, of course, will continue to ask, "Who are you?" And you may still answer with your name, your job, your history. But inside, you'll know that these are roles, useful fictions. You don't have to believe them completely. You can wear the mask without becoming it. You can play the part without getting lost in the character. You can return, again and again, to the stillness behind the stage. This is the paradox. In becoming no one, you become more available to everyone. You are no longer locked into proving yourself. You don't need to win every argument. You don't have to be right all the time. You don't need validation from every passing gaze. And in that freedom, your heart opens. You become more present, more kind, more alive. Not because you have found who you are, but because you've stopped needing to. This way of being doesn't reject identity. It simply puts it in perspective. You can still enjoy your personality. You can still pursue your passions. You can still take care of your story. But you are not enslaved to it. You are not reduced to it. You carry it like a garment, not like a cage. In the great silence of being no one, something paradoxically eternal shines through. It's not personal. It has no opinion. It doesn't demand a label. It simply is. And maybe that's the true self of all, the one that needs no name, the one that isn't bound by memory or fear, the one that remains when everything else falls away. So next time you feel lost or uncertain or fractured by the roles you're expected to play, try this. Sit in stillness. Let the thoughts come and go. Let the story fade. Let the need to be someone soften. Notice what remains. Not a name, not an image, just a quiet, open presence. That presence is not trying to be special. It's not defending anything. It is simply here. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. The paradox of becoming no one doesn't ask you to disappear. It invites you to disidentify, to stop gripping the illusion that you are your story, your role, your mind, to live in a deeper truth that you are the sky, not the weather, the awareness, not the identity, the silence, not the sound. Body swap paradox. Imagine waking up in a room that feels familiar, yet somehow wrong. You sit up, confused, and shuffle toward the mirror, only to freeze. The face staring back is not your own. The hands you raise don't match your memory. The voice you speak with sounds foreign. You haven't just had a strange dream. You've swapped bodies with someone else. You remember everything about who you are, your memories, your emotions, your identity. But the body is not yours. This is the core of the body swap paradox. If your mind is placed into another body, are you still you? At first, the answer seems obvious. Of course you are. You have your thoughts, your memories, your personality. It's still you, just in someone else's shell. But the deeper you explore the question, the more unsettling it becomes. Because identity is not just shaped by memory, it's also shaped by the body that carries it. Your posture, your tone of voice, your energy levels, your sense of the world, all of these are filtered through the body. So if your body changes, do you change too? And if someone else wakes up in your body with their memories, do they become you in the eyes of the world? This paradox invites us to re-examine one of the oldest philosophical questions: what makes you you? Is it your brain? Your memories? Your body? Your soul? Or something more elusive? If two people were to swap bodies, but retain their memories and personalities, who would you treat as who? And what would that reveal about how we define identity? Many science fiction stories play with this thought. Two characters switch bodies, often through a machine, a magical relic, or a twist of fate, and must live in each other's lives. At first, it's played for laughs, but underneath the humor is a deeply philosophical dilemma. If others see your body, they treat you as the person they recognize, but inside you feel misrepresented, you feel invisible, and slowly you start to ask, was my sense of self ever really mine? Or was it a dance between who I believe I am and how the world reflects me back? The body swap paradox is not just a fantasy. It touches real-world experiences, people who undergo major physical transformations, those who suffer from body dysmorphia, or who live with disabilities or chronic illness. These experiences can make the body feel alien, unfamiliar, even adversarial. And yet, identity endures. Or does it? Philosopher John Locke once suggested that personal identity is rooted in memory. If you can remember doing something, then you are the person who did it. According to Locke, your body can change, but as long as memory continues, so does the self. But others challenge this. If identity is memory alone, then what happens when memories are lost? Is a person with severe amnesia no longer the same self? If two people were to swap memories completely, would their souls switch too? The paradox becomes even more interesting when we think of how much of our sense of self is shaped by embodiment. The way we move through space, the way people look at us, the feedback we receive based on how we look, how tall we are, how strong, how fragile. The body is not neutral. It influences our confidence, our choices, our emotions. Put your mind into a new body, and everything changes. Your interactions, your instincts, even your voice. The self is not a ghost trapped in flesh. It is entangled with the flesh. So now the question shifts. If your personality begins to shift inside a new body, if your behavior adapts, if your emotions change, if your beliefs adjust, are you still you? Or are you slowly becoming someone else? In a long enough body swap, does identity migrate? Or does it dissolve? There's also the problem of perception. If your mind is in someone else's body, but no one believes you, then the world continues to treat the body, not the mind. This creates a tension between internal identity and external recognition. Which one defines the self more? How others treat you, or how you experience yourself? In real life, many people live with this gap. Their internal identity does not match how others perceive them. Transgender individuals, for example, often describe a dissonance between body and identity. They may feel a deep, unshakable sense of who they are, despite having to live in a body that does not reflect it, at least in the eyes of the world. This very real experience echoes the body swap paradox and shows us how fragile and complex identity really is. Some might argue that consciousness is the constant, that no matter what body you're in, the pure awareness of being, of observing, feeling, choosing, remains. And that awareness, they say, is the true self, not the memories, not the face, not even the thoughts, just the knowing presence behind it all. If this is true, then the body is simply the vessel, not the self. But then again, can you really separate the two? Even in dreams, where we sometimes inhabit bodies that aren't our own, where we feel like a different person, we wake up with the same sense of I. It's a slippery thing, this self. It seems to follow us, yet vanish when examined too closely. And the body swap paradox exposes that slipperiness in a way few other thought experiments do. Let's say you lived in someone else's body for a year. At first, everything would feel strange, but gradually you'd adapt. You'd build new habits, new physical instincts. You'd be shaped by how others respond to your new appearance. You might even begin to forget what your old body felt like. So, when the swap ends and you return to your original form, what's changed? Are you picking up where you left off? Or are you someone new, carrying memories of being someone else? the paradox doesn't resolve easily. It shows us that identity is not a single thread, but a web. Body, memory, behavior, social interaction, and consciousness all are woven together. To change one is to tug on the rest, and yet we hold tightly to the illusion of a fixed self. We say, "I am me," as if it were simple. But maybe the point isn't to resolve the paradox, but to soften around it. To see that the self is not a fortress, but a field. A space where experience happens. A space that can change, stretch, dissolve, and reform and still be real. So what would it mean to be in another's body? Not just as a thought experiment, but as a practice of empathy. Could we learn to understand others more deeply? Could we become more aware of the ways our bodies shape our minds? Could we hold our identities more gently, knowing they are not as solid as they seem? The body swap paradox reminds us that we are not as isolated as we think, that the boundaries between minds and bodies, between inner and outer, between self and other, are not absolute. They're porous, and in that porousness lies both mystery and connection. So, the next time you feel certain of who you are, pause. Consider the body you live in, not as a prison or a possession, but as part of the story. Consider how different you might feel in another form, another context, another life. And remember that who you are is not just what you think, but also what you inhabit, and how the world reflects you. To be you is not a fixed state. It is a fluid experience, a blend of mind, body, and perception. And the body swap paradox invites us to hold that truth gently, to understand that the self is both more fragile and more expansive than we imagine. Contextual Selves paradox. You are not the same person with everyone you meet. You've noticed it. The version of you that laughs loudly with childhood friends is not the same one that speaks carefully during a job interview. The you who comforts a loved one in crisis is not the same you who debates fiercely in an online forum. It's still you, but something shifts: your tone, your thoughts, even your beliefs. This phenomenon is at the heart of the contextual selves paradox, the quiet, unnerving idea that who you are is not fixed, but shaped by the situations you find yourself in. If you show up differently in every context, then which version is the real you? At first glance, the answer seems obvious: they're all you. People are complex. We adapt. We code switch. We wear different hats. But the paradox appears when the differences are not just surface level. When the way you feel, think, react, and even believe changes so much that it no longer feels like a single, unified self operating in multiple roles, but multiple selves taking turns behind the wheel. You begin to wonder, are you one person merely adapting? Or are you many, playing different roles that never quite meet? We like to believe in a core self, something stable and constant. We want to believe there is an authentic me buried beneath the layers. But when you act out of character, or when you change dramatically between environments, you begin to question whether there is any solid core at all. If your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors can change so drastically depending on who you're with and where you are, then are you truly being yourself in any of those contexts? Or are all those selves just masks stitched together by circumstance? Social psychology sheds light on this paradox. It tells us that context powerfully shapes behavior. We behave differently when observed. We respond to social norms. We mirror others unconsciously. Even our sense of morality can bend under pressure or persuasion. In the famous Stanford prison experiment, ordinary people took on roles as guards and prisoners, and within days, began acting in ways they never imagined. The environment didn't just influence their behavior, it reshaped their identity. So then the question becomes, if context can alter not just what you do, but who you are, then what does it mean to be true to yourself? Philosopher Charles Taylor speaks of the dialogical self, the idea that identity is formed through interaction with others. You are not a single voice in a vacuum. You are a chorus, shaped by conversations, by culture, by expectations. Your personality emerges not alone, but in response. This idea helps us understand why we seem to carry different selves in different rooms. We're not being fake, we're being relational. And yet, it's easy to feel fragmented. You might find yourself wondering which version of you is genuine. Is it the one who smiles politely, or the one who wants to scream? Is it the one who speaks up, or the one who stays quiet? Is it the version who thrives under pressure, or the one who falls apart when no one's watching? The paradox lies in our desire for consistency. We want to believe in an essential self, a singular identity that persists across all situations. But what if identity isn't essential at all? What if it's contextual, fluid, constructed again and again in response to each moment? Some psychologists now speak of the self as multiplex, not a single stable thing, but a flexible system of traits that are activated differently depending on the setting. You are not one person, you are many, and each context draws out a different configuration. The paradox isn't that we change. The paradox is that we still insist we are one. There's beauty in this flexibility. It allows us to belong, to navigate, to understand. But there's also tension. Because when the differences become too great, when you feel like a stranger to yourself from one situation to the next, it can create a quiet crisis. Who are you, really, if you are someone else everywhere you go? This crisis is felt acutely by people who navigate multiple cultures, languages, or identities. Someone who speaks one language at home and another in public may feel like two versions of themselves. Someone who is praised at work for being assertive but punished at home for the same may feel split. The contextual selves paradox is not just psychological, it is existential. It lives in every moment you feel caught between roles, unsure which part of you is allowed to speak. And yet, perhaps there is no contradiction in being many. Maybe the true self is not a single point, but a whole constellation, a landscape of possibilities, a spectrum of responses. Just as a river looks different under different skies, so too do you shift depending on the emotional climate. Maybe the mistake is not in being many, but in demanding to be one. In Eastern philosophy, particularly in Zen Buddhism, the self is not seen as a fixed entity. It is a process, a dance, a flicker. There is no essence, only presence. The self arises in relation, in each breath, each moment, each connection. The idea is not to discover a real self behind the masks, but to dissolve the illusion of permanence altogether. When you stop trying to pin down the self, what remains is peace. In this view, the contextual self is not a problem. It is reality. It is evidence of your attunement, your aliveness, your ability to meet each moment with the parts of you that are most needed. You are not inconsistent, you are responsive. You are not false, you are layered. Still, there's wisdom in noticing when the roles you play begin to feel heavy, when a version of you no longer fits, when context no longer calls forth what feels alive. These are signs that something deeper is asking for space, not a single true self, but perhaps a truer way of moving across the selves you carry. So how do we live with the contextual selves paradox? Perhaps we begin by embracing it, by seeing identity not as a fixed destination, but as a shifting relationship. You are not who you were yesterday. You are not who you'll be tomorrow. You are who you are now, in this context, in this moment. And that is enough. You can still live with integrity, even if you change. Integrity doesn't mean being the same everywhere. It means being honest, being present, and being kind across all your variations. It means listening for what each situation requires, not just of you, but of the you that can respond with care. So the next time you feel yourself change in someone's presence, pause. Don't panic. Don't assume you've lost yourself. Ask instead, what part of me is this calling forth? And does that part still reflect what I value? The contextual selves paradox isn't here to confuse you. It's here to reveal you. To show you that identity is not a monologue, but a dialogue. Not a sculpture, but a song. Not a single note, but a harmony of selves moving and shifting in a world that is constantly changing. And maybe, just maybe, The most honest self is not the one that refuses to change, but the one that learns how to change without losing its center. Time travel identity paradox. Imagine stepping into a time machine. There's a soft hum, a shimmer of light, and suddenly you are no longer in your present. You've gone backward, maybe to your childhood home, maybe to a distant century, or perhaps forward to a future you've never lived. You wander, unnoticed, until you find someone familiar. They look just like you. They move like you. And then you realize it is you, but younger, or older, or somehow different. And suddenly, a question forms that makes everything unstable. If you can exist in more than one time, in more than one version, then who are you, really? This is the time travel identity paradox, a haunting and fascinating thought experiment that challenges our deepest assumptions about identity, continuity, and selfhood. It asks, if you meet yourself in another time, is that person still you? Or are they a different person entirely? If your mind travels to another point in time, but your body stays here, are you still here or there? And if two versions of you can exist at once, which one has the rightful claim to your identity? Time travel stories have long explored these ideas. We love the thrill of bending time, of visiting our past or glimpsing our future. But beneath the adventure is something stranger, something unsettling. Because time travel doesn't just stretch time, it fractures identity. If identity is tied to continuity, then what happens when continuity loops, splits, or duplicates? If you alter your past, have you changed yourself? And if you meet a version of yourself who made different choices, who is the real one? Let's begin with a classic scenario. You travel back in time and meet your younger self. You remember being them, but they don't yet know who you are. You've grown. You've changed. But the person in front of you is part of your personal history. They are, in some way, you. But now you stand face to face, two minds, two bodies, two moments of you in the same place. Are you the same person, divided by time? Or have you become fundamentally different? Philosopher Derek Parfit proposed that personal identity is not about a strict, unbroken thread of sameness, but about psychological continuity, overlapping chains of memory, personality, and intention. But time travel breaks that chain. When you jump from the present to the past or future, you sever the linear path. You skip links in the chain. You step out of the story and then step back in somewhere else. So who are you in that moment between? Now imagine going forward in time and meeting your future self, an old person, weathered by years you haven't yet lived. They know things you don't. They've made choices you haven't faced. They speak to you like a parent, a mentor, a stranger. And again, the paradox rises. Are they the real you, waiting ahead in the timeline? Or are they simply a version of you, one possibility among many? If time branches and choices split reality, then perhaps you're not meeting your future, but a future, one you might not even live to see. This calls into question the idea of a fixed, singular identity. If time can be altered, if versions of you can coexist, diverge, and interact, then the self is no longer linear. It becomes multidimensional. It becomes plural. And in that plurality, the notion of a single I begins to unravel. Consider this. If your present self travels back and prevents a key event, one that defined who you became, then who are you now? If you erase the heartbreak that shaped your compassion, or the mistake that built your wisdom, are you still the same person? Or have you replaced yourself with someone who never had to learn those lessons? The paradox becomes even more intense when time travel results in duplicates, two versions of you existing simultaneously. Think of films like Looper, Predestination, or Primer, where the self loops and overlaps. When the copies confront each other, the question isn't just which one is real, it's do both have equal claim to being me? If your identity can be multiplied, then perhaps it was never singular to begin with. Perhaps you were always a pattern, not a point. And then there's the possibility of memory conflict. Imagine that you alter your past, just slightly, and return to the present. Everything is different. Your friends, your relationships, even your values. You remember the old timeline, but everyone else remembers this new one. You carry memories no one else shares. So who are you now? Are you the person who was, or the person who is? Can you trust your memories when reality itself has changed? These questions are not just fiction. They echo real experiences. People who suffer traumatic brain injuries or memory loss often report feeling like they're no longer themselves. People who undergo radical transformation, emotional, spiritual, or psychological, often say, "I'm not the same person anymore." These statements reveal the fragility of identity. You don't need a time machine to feel split across time. Sometimes, all it takes is change. And yet, we cling to the idea of a stable self. We want to believe that no matter how much we change, something essential remains. That the I who remembers is the same as the I who acts. But time travel mocks that belief. It says, what if you could step outside your own story? What if you could see yourself as a loop, or a fork, or a tangle? What if the real you is not a person but a process? In some Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, the self is already seen as impermanent, not fixed, but flowing, not singular, but compounded. The self arises moment by moment, shaped by karma, memory, and cause and effect. In this view, the time travel paradox is not a contradiction, it's a revelation. It shows that the self is not a thing that travels through time, but a pattern that emerges in time. The Western tradition, too, is beginning to shift. More psychologists and philosophers are exploring identity as narrative. You are the story you tell yourself about yourself. But if time travel disrupts that story, scrambles it, rewrites it, then what happens to the self? Maybe it changes. Maybe it collapses. Maybe it adapts. So what can we learn from the time travel identity paradox? First, that identity is not simple. It is not a name. It is not a face. It is not even memory. It is something fluid, complex, and responsive to time. Second, that continuity is often an illusion, a helpful one, but still an illusion. And third, that the self might be more mysterious than we imagine. Not a solid thread stretched across time, but a series of sparks, flickering across the landscape of memory, possibility, and change. Perhaps then, the truest version of you is not the one fixed in a single timeline, but the one who can move between them, the one who learns, the one who reflects, the one who grows across time, across contradiction, across selves. Maybe the paradox isn't something to solve. Maybe it's a mirror, a way of seeing just how strange and beautiful identity really is. So if you ever wonder what would happen if you met yourself in another time, pause. Ask yourself, would I recognize me? Would I love me? Would I forgive me? Would I even believe we were the same? Because maybe, just maybe, you never were. Identity and accountability paradox. You make choices every day. Some are small, what to eat, what to say, how to spend your time. Others are profound, how to treat others, how to respond to anger, how to carry your past. You are praised for good choices and blamed for bad ones. This is part of being a person. We believe you are responsible for what you do because you are the same person who did it. But what if that idea isn't so simple? What if you are not the same person you used to be? What if, over time, your values, your beliefs, even your personality have shifted so much that you feel like a different being entirely? Are you still accountable for who you were? This is the heart of the identity and accountability paradox, a quiet yet unsettling question about time, change, and responsibility. It asks, if identity is not fixed, if we evolve, shed skins, and grow into new versions of ourselves, then how can we be held accountable for the choices made by our past selves? If the person who committed a harmful act 10 years ago no longer exists in any meaningful way, is it fair, or even coherent, to punish or blame their present-day version? At first glance, the answer seems clear. Of course, people should be accountable. Without that principle, society would collapse. Laws would lose meaning. Justice would have no anchor. But the deeper you reflect, the more the ground begins to shift. Because identity is not a single line traced through time. It is a river, changing shape, meandering, even reversing course. The self that made the choice is not always the self who faces its consequences. Consider a person who commits a crime in their youth, something serious, even unforgivable. Decades later, they are reformed. They've built a different life. They've changed their habits, their thoughts, their heart. Do they still deserve punishment? Retribution? Public shaming? Are they the same person who did the harm? Or has that person vanished into the folds of time, leaving behind only memory and consequence? Philosopher Derek Parfit suggested that personal identity is not what matters in survival. What matters is psychological connectedness, memory, intention, character. But those links are not always strong. Memory fades. Intentions shift. People forget who they were. Some feel haunted by their past. Others feel estranged from it. I don't recognize who I used to be, they say. I would never do that now. So then, are they still the same person? This paradox doesn't only apply to major offenses. It appears in everyday life. You might recall how you treated someone in high school, thoughtlessly, harshly, carelessly. And now, older, wiser, more compassionate, you cringe. You want to apologize. You want to make it right. But what if that person has moved on? Or what if they hold on to that moment while you feel miles removed from the version of yourself who caused it? Here the paradox becomes emotional. It asks, how do we reconcile with harm we caused when we no longer identify with the one who caused it? Is remorse possible without self-recognition? Is forgiveness meaningful if the self asking for it no longer exists in the same form? And what about those who suffer? For them, the pain is not abstract, it endures. You did this, they say. And they are right. Because even if your inner landscape has changed, the effect of your past action remains in the world. And the one who did it, however distant, carried your name, your face, your voice. So where do we draw the line between change and evasion? Between transformation and denial? Perhaps part of the answer lies in the nature of time itself. We are not frozen. We are not statues walking through life. We are verbs. Living, becoming, forgetting, remembering. We are not one person, but many, stacked within a single lifespan. To be human is to change. To wake up as someone new, slowly, silently, again and again. Yet accountability must still exist. Without it, we lose the ability to repair, to hold meaning, to teach. But perhaps accountability does not require a rigid self, it requires continuity. A thread, however thin, between who you were and who you are. The thread might be memory, or guilt, or understanding, or the courage to say, that was me, even if it's not me now. True accountability may lie not in identifying with the past self, but in recognizing its shadow, in being willing to carry the weight of its actions, not as punishment, but as presence, as a commitment to repair, to respond, to grow. This view allows for something rare and necessary: compassion. Compassion for the one who made the mistake, compassion for the one who now must carry it, and compassion for the self who stands in the middle, changed but not immune. But the paradox works both ways. What about someone who claims they've changed, but shows no empathy, no understanding of their past? They say, that wasn't me, but only to escape blame. Here the paradox can be used as a shield, as an excuse, as a way to avoid responsibility. And so we must be careful, because true change includes reckoning. Growth includes grief. Accountability is not incompatible with transformation, but it requires humility. And so we arrive at a deeper understanding. The identity and accountability paradox does not demand that we remain the same. It asks that we remain responsible. Even as we change, we must turn toward what we've done. Even if we no longer feel like the self who did it, we live in the echo of its choices, and we can choose to respond with care. This doesn't mean we never forgive. It means forgiveness is more than forgetting. It is a recognition of both change and consequence. It is a bridge between the self who harmed and the self who heals. It is the act of remembering responsibly. In many ways, the paradox mirrors how we think about others too. When someone hurts us and later claims they've changed, we ask, "Are you really different? Or are you pretending?" We want evidence, we want repair, but sometimes people do change, and that change is real. And we are left with a new paradox. Can we forgive someone who no longer exists in the form that harmed us? There's no easy answer. Identity, like time, is fluid. Accountability, like healing, is layered. Perhaps all we can do is meet each moment with honesty. To ask, who am I now? What do I carry? What must I make right? So next time you remember something you regret, or are confronted with something you've done, pause. Notice how you feel. Do you recoil because you no longer relate to that version of yourself? That's growth. Do you want to forget? That's fear. Do you want to make it right, even if you've changed? That's responsibility. The identity and accountability paradox reminds us that we are not prisoners of our past, but we are participants in its unfolding. We can evolve, but we must not erase. We can transform, but we must also account. Because in the end, being accountable is not just about who you were. It's about who you are willing to become. The mirror of regret illusion. You sit quietly, and a memory rises. A moment from your past, a choice you made, a word you wish you hadn't spoken, a door you didn't walk through. It visits you like a ghost, soft, slow, persistent. And in that moment, you feel something heavy open in your chest. Regret. It stings not because the past is changeable, but because it isn't. And yet, there's something strange about it. You aren't the person who made that decision anymore. You've grown. You've learned. And still, you feel tethered to it. Trapped in a reflection of a self long gone. This is the mirror of regret illusion, the emotional and philosophical riddle that arises when we see the past through the eyes of the present and forget that the person we are now is not the one who made the choice. Regret is natural. It's human. It means we care. It means we reflect. But regret carries a peculiar distortion. It asks us to judge the past using the knowledge of the present. We look into the mirror of memory and we see what we should have done, what we could have said. But the mirror lies, because it shows us the scene with a clarity that we didn't have at the time. It shows us not what happened, but what we now know about what happened. The illusion is subtle, but powerful. You feel like the person you should have known better, but that person didn't. They couldn't. They made the best choice they could with the tools, beliefs, and emotions they had in that moment. The regret comes from the gap between then and now, from the difference between who you were and who you've become. In this way, regret is often not about failure, it's about growth. Yet, the illusion makes us forget that. It pulls us into a false continuity. It tells us you knew better, even then. But the truth is, you didn't. If you had known better, you would have done better. This doesn't mean we excuse harm. It means we acknowledge evolution. We recognize that judgment cast backward is always distorted by the light of who we've become. It's tempting to believe that regret keeps us honest, that it keeps us accountable, and sometimes it does. But often regret becomes a loop, a punishment, a mental replay that changes nothing, but costs everything. It keeps us stuck in a version of ourselves that no longer exists. It asks us to carry guilt for a person we've already outgrown. The mirror of regret illusion is like trying to fix a reflection by polishing the glass. But the reflection is not the problem. The past is done. What you're really seeing is your present understanding of a former self. And you are not them anymore. You are standing behind the glass, changed, wiser perhaps, softer, but still holding the mirror as if it contains something you can repair. Sometimes we even regret things we didn't do, the unspoken word, the missed chance, the fork in the road we didn't take. And again, we believe that our current self should have acted differently. But we forget that back then, the risk felt too great. The timing felt off. The need for safety was real. We made a choice, and now we live with the version of ourselves that made it. And that, too, is human. So what's the alternative? Do we simply ignore the past? Pretend we have no regrets? That's not quite the answer either. Regret has its place. It teaches. It humbles. It reminds us that our choices matter. But to live inside regret is to become its prisoner, to believe that what's done must define what is, to confuse remembering with reliving, to stare into the mirror and believe we are still the reflection. But you are not the reflection. You are the one holding the mirror, the one who sees more now than you did then, the one who feels differently, the one who would choose differently. That difference is not a wound, it is a sign of transformation. You can't change the moment that haunts you, but you can change your relationship to it. You can let it inform you, not shame you. You can let it teach you, not trap you. You can say, that wasn't my best moment, but it's not my final one. You can make space for self-forgiveness, not because you were perfect, but because you were trying. The illusion also appears when we regret who we were in relationships, the way we showed up, the way we treated someone, or how we let ourselves be treated. We wish we had been braver, clearer, kinder, but we weren't ready. We didn't have the strength, or the language, or the awareness. We do now, and that's why it hurts. The pain isn't proof of wrongdoing. It's proof that you've outgrown who you were. Regret is a measure of distance. The wider the gap between then and now, the sharper the sting. But instead of letting that sting consume you, you can use it as a compass. It points not just to what you did, but to who you want to be. It illuminates your values, your capacity, your desire to do better. You can't erase the old version of yourself, but you can honor them. You can say, I see you. I know why you did what you did. I've learned, and I carry your lessons with me. This is not forgetting. This is not bypassing. This is integrating. This is the beginning of healing. Sometimes we hold on to regret as a way to keep someone else's pain alive inside us, as a form of loyalty, as if letting go of regret would mean letting go of them. But guilt is not love. Shame is not justice. You can carry accountability without carrying self-hatred. You can seek to make amends not from punishment, but from growth, from sincerity, from presence. The mirror of regret illusion tells us that if we punish ourselves enough, we'll fix the past. But the past doesn't need fixing. It needs understanding. It needs compassion. The true healing happens not in rewinding the story, but in telling a better one going forward. So when regret visits you again, gently ask, what is this teaching me? Who have I become because of it? What would I do now? And how can I live that truth today? Let the mirror reflect not your shame, but your evolution. You are not the same person you were. That's the whole point. Regret is not a sign you're broken. It's a sign you're changing. Let the mirror remind you that growth often follows remorse, that clarity often arrives late, and that the person you are now is someone who cares, who remembers, who wants to do better. That's enough. That's more than enough. Public. V's. Private self-paradox. We all wear masks. Not the theatrical kind, or even the kind we put on during a pandemic. These masks are invisible, yet powerful. They shape how others see us, and often shield the deeper, private versions of who we truly are. In public, we might appear cheerful, confident, and composed. We smile when we're expected to, nod when we should, and sometimes laugh even when we don't find something funny. But behind the scenes, in the quiet solitude of our inner world, another self exists, one that doubts, questions, hesitates, and sometimes aches. This tension between the public persona and the private self is not just a part of being human. It is one of the deepest paradoxes of our identity. The public. V's. Private self paradox asks a disarming question. Who are you really? Are you the version of yourself that the world sees, the polished, practiced identity crafted for social survival? Or are you the person that only you truly know, the one who lies awake with thoughts that never get spoken, who hides fears behind well-timed smiles, who whispers truths into the dark? We move through our lives navigating these two realms, often so seamlessly that we barely notice the divide. And yet, the more we examine this split, the more we begin to wonder if we are one person at all, or two identities sharing the same body. In a professional setting, for instance, you might project competence, decisiveness, and poise. You might be admired by coworkers, even looked to for leadership. Yet at home, you could be quiet, unsure, or plagued by imposter syndrome. The applause of others might echo through your day, while inside your mind, self-doubt plays a constant, quieter tune. This gap between how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself becomes a chasm that few ever see, and fewer still are allowed to cross. But it raises a crucial question. Is the you that others admire a lie, or just another facet of the truth? Psychologists have long studied the idea of multiple selves. Carl Jung spoke of the persona and the shadow, the self we show the world, and the self we hide even from ourselves. Irving Goffman viewed life as a performance, where each person is an actor managing impressions on a public stage. In this view, the public self is not necessarily inauthentic. It's simply adapted to context. Just as you wouldn't wear a swimsuit to a business meeting, you don't share your deepest fears during a casual lunch. The masks we wear are not necessarily lies. They are strategies. But over time, even the most functional strategy can begin to feel like a prison. Think of someone who's considered the life of the party, always smiling, always energetic, always making others laugh. Everyone assumes they're happy, fulfilled, emotionally rich. But what if, behind closed doors, that person feels empty? What if the laughter they create is a way to silence their own pain? Are they the cheerful soul everyone adores, or the lonely one who stares at the ceiling every night, wondering why they feel so hollow? This internal conflict can feel like living a double life. And the longer the public self and private self diverge, the harder it becomes to reconcile them. You start to question not just which version is true, but whether any version is. Social media complicates this paradox even more. Online, we curate our lives. We share highlights, not breakdowns. We post smiles, not tears. Our profiles become portfolios of we wish to display. A digital mask that is always smiling, always doing well, always living our best life. Meanwhile, the private self sits behind the screen, scrolling through the lives of others, comparing, doubting, shrinking. The paradox becomes more than psychological. It becomes systemic. In a culture of performance, being authentic can feel like rebellion. And yet, beneath every post, every filter, every like, the silent question lingers: does anyone truly know me? But what if both selves are real? What if the outgoing, confident public persona and the quiet, vulnerable private self are just different rooms in the same house? We don't question the authenticity of a person who is both playful with friends and serious at work. We accept that context shapes behavior. But when the internal and external selves begin to contradict each other, when one says I'm fine while the other screams I'm not, it creates a psychic tension that feels unbearable. It can lead to anxiety, burnout, or even a sense of identity crisis. We begin to ask, if I always feel like I'm pretending, does that mean I've forgotten how to be real? Some people manage this duality with ease. They see their public self as a role they step into when needed, like a uniform. Others find it exhausting. They feel as if they're constantly betraying their true self just to be accepted or to succeed. The cost of the mask becomes too high. And in moments of solitude, when the show ends, the lights go down, and there's no one to impress, the private self steps forward, often with questions that cut deep. Why do I feel so alone even when I'm surrounded? Why do I act so different from how I feel? Why does my own reflection sometimes look like a stranger? The paradox is especially sharp in people who are praised for qualities they secretly struggle with. A leader seen as decisive might privately agonize over every choice. A teacher known for patience might battle daily frustration. A caregiver admired for compassion might feel numb inside. These people are not being dishonest, they are simply living in the space between expectation and reality. But that space can be hard to live in. Over time, the gap can widen until it no longer feels like a performance, but a fracture. So how do we bridge this gap? Some suggest that the true self is found in moments of quiet, when we are alone and unobserved, when we no longer feel the need to impress. Others argue that who we are in public, especially under pressure, reveals our core. The paradox offers no simple answer, because identity is not a single note, it is a symphony. Some parts are loud and public, others soft and secret. Some are in harmony, others clash. But all are part of the whole. Perhaps the problem isn't that we have multiple selves, but that we're told we must have only one. This paradox touches on vulnerability too. To let someone see your private self is to risk rejection. It requires trust, courage, and a willingness to be seen in your full, messy complexity. That's why many of us keep the private self hidden. We fear that if others knew the whole truth, our doubts, our insecurities, our real thoughts, they would turn away. And so we present a version of ourselves that feels safer, more likable, more acceptable. But in doing so, we often reinforce the very isolation we're trying to escape. At its worst, the gap between the public and private self can lead to dissociation, a feeling of being detached from your own life, like watching a movie where you're the star, but not the director. It can lead to emotional numbness, imposter syndrome, or depression. And yet, it's important to remember that having multiple selves is not abnormal. It's human. We are shaped by roles, environments, and relationships. Identity is fluid, and adaptability is not a flaw, but a strength. The goal is not to collapse all selves into one, but to find a sense of coherence, even amidst complexity. In truth, everyone you meet is wrestling with this paradox in some way. The confident speaker may struggle with anxiety. The nurturing parent may feel lost. The smiling coworker may cry alone. When we recognize this universal struggle, we cultivate compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. We learn that being human means being layered, contradictory, and ever-changing. And that's okay. We can strive to be more honest without tearing off the mask. We can bring the private self a little closer to the surface, in moments of safety and trust. So who are you, really? You are not just the voice you use in meetings, or the smile you flash in photographs. You are not just the thoughts you keep hidden, or the tears you wipe away in secret. You are both. You are the one who performs and the one who retreats. You are the one who feels strong and the one who feels small. And the more you embrace both, the more whole you become. The public vs. private self paradox is not a flaw in your identity. It is a mirror reflecting your depth. And in that mirror, you may find that being real doesn't mean being one thing. It means being honest about your many selves. Not always, not everywhere, but enough to feel seen, enough to breathe, enough to belong. Because sometimes the truest self is not the loudest or the most visible. It is the one that dares to whisper, "This is me," even when the world expects an echo. Self-knowledge paradox. We are told to know ourselves. It's ancient wisdom, inscribed above the Oracle of Delphi, echoed in philosophy, therapy, and self-help books. It seems simple enough. Look inward, reflect, discover who you are. And yet, the deeper you search, the more mysterious you become. You find contradictions, blind spots, behaviors that surprise you, desires you don't understand, thoughts you didn't choose. The more you try to know yourself, the more fragmented you begin to feel. This is the self-knowledge paradox, the strange truth that the one who seeks to know the self is also the one being observed. The observer and the observed are the same, and in that circular gaze, clarity begins to blur. At first glance, self-knowledge seems possible, even noble. You are the one living your life, after all. You know your memories. You feel your emotions. You hear your thoughts. Who could know you better than you? But then, something strange happens. You act in a way that shocks you. You lose your temper when you thought you were calm. You sabotage something you wanted. You chase something you said didn't matter. And you realize, maybe you don't know yourself as well as you thought. The paradox begins here. Self-knowledge depends on access, but much of who we are lies beneath conscious awareness. You can't observe all of yourself from the inside. Some parts of you hide, deliberately or silently. Some are shaped by trauma, others by habit, culture, or conditioning. You may not even know why you feel what you feel. You can describe the feeling, but its origin escapes you. You know the surface, but not the roots. Think of your personality. You might say you're introverted, or empathetic, or anxious. But are you always those things? Or only in some situations? And if your traits shift with context, is that who you are, or just who you are being in that moment? Self-knowledge assumes consistency, but the self is fluid. And if the self is fluid, then what, exactly, are you trying to know? Even memory, something we rely on for self-definition, is unreliable. Your recollections are reconstructed, not recorded. You might remember your childhood one way, and then later learn the facts were different. You thought you were the victim, but maybe you played a role in the conflict. You thought you were confident, but maybe you were just louder than your fear. Self-knowledge is tangled in memory, and memory is often just a story you've told yourself for long enough that it feels like truth. And then there are blind spots. Qualities others see clearly, but you can't or won't. You might believe you're a good listener until someone close to you says they've never felt heard. You might think you're honest until you realize how much you hide behind politeness. Self-deception is not always malicious, it's protective. It keeps the ego intact, but it makes self-knowledge harder. You are both the mirror and the reflection, trying to study yourself with tools that cannot fully detach from what they're studying. Even your inner voice, the one narrating your thoughts, may not be telling the truth. It speaks with authority. It claims to know you, but often it speaks from fear, from history, from stories absorbed long ago. You hear it say, "You always mess things up," or "You're not good enough," and you believe it because it sounds like you. But that voice is not the whole self. It's just one part of a complex chorus. So then, is self-knowledge even possible? Can you ever truly know who you are? Perhaps not in the total, definitive sense we often imagine, but perhaps that's not the goal. What if self-knowledge is not a destination but a relationship? Not something you possess, but something you practice. Not a static truth, but a moving reflection. In this view, self-knowledge becomes a kind of intimacy. You get close. You learn patterns. You sit with yourself, not to define but to understand. You ask gently, "What do I feel right now? What do I need? What am I avoiding?" And you listen, not for final answers, but for honest ones. You learn to spot the masks you wear, the defenses you raise, the ways you distort your image to fit a role, a fear, a need. You learn to watch yourself with compassion, not to judge, but to recognize. You accept that who you are is a process, not a product. You notice how your sense of self changes across roles, at work, at home, alone, in love, in pain. You are not the same person in every room, and that doesn't mean you're inauthentic. It means you're human. A self is not a singular point. It's a spectrum of responses, shaped by presence, emotion, memory, and hope. Sometimes others help you know yourself. A friend reflects something back that you didn't see. A partner helps you uncover a buried part of your past. A stranger says something that lands like truth. Self-knowledge is not always found within. Sometimes it's revealed in connection. And sometimes the self you thought you were becomes outdated. You've grown, you've healed. And now your old self-image feels like a costume that no longer fits. Letting go of that identity can feel like a loss, but it's also a beginning. The self is not something to hold tightly. It's something to meet freshly, over and over again. The paradox softens when we stop demanding certainty, when we allow the self to be unknown, when we allow space for mystery, for silence, for change. Then, self-knowledge becomes a quiet presence, a kind of listening, a kind of being with. It's in the moment you notice your breath and realize how anxious you've been. It's in the pause before reacting, when you feel the old impulse rise and choose differently. It's in the tears you didn't expect, or the laugh that surprises you. It's in the moments you catch yourself off guard and think, maybe I'm not who I thought I was, and maybe that's okay. Self-knowledge, then, is not about solving the self. It's about witnessing it. Not about owning it, but about relating to it. Not about reaching a final truth, but about staying close to the unfolding. So the next time you feel like you don't understand yourself, pause. Don't rush to define. I don't cling to a label. Just notice, listen, ask, and know that even in not knowing, something important is happening. You are paying attention, you are showing up, and maybe that is self-knowledge, not as certainty, but as care. Multiple personalities paradox. You think you are one person. You have a name, a story, a personality. You carry a sense of continuity, that the thoughts in your head all belong to the same I. But beneath the surface, something more complex stirs. Sometimes you react in ways that surprise you. Sometimes you feel like two minds are arguing within the same skull. Sometimes you don't recognize the version of yourself that shows up in certain situations. We call this mood swings, emotional nuance, or behavioral complexity. But what if these aren't just passing states? What if your identity is not singular at all? This is the multiple personalities paradox, the quiet, unnerving realization that you might not be one person but many. Not in the clinical sense of dissociative identity disorder, but in a broader, philosophical sense, that within each of us are different selves that rise and fall depending on context, emotion, memory, and need. That who you are when you're angry is not who you are when you're in love. That who you are around your family is not the same as who you are alone at night. And yet, they're all you. So if you are made of many parts, some confident, some fearful, some compassionate, some cold, which one is the real you? At first, we try to simplify. We say, I was just acting out of character. But what if that character is still a part of you, just one you prefer to keep quiet? Or we say, I wasn't myself. But what if you were? And that's what unsettles you. What if we are not single personalities with occasional deviations, but collections of parts that take turns steering the ship? Psychologists and philosophers have long wrestled with this idea. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social face we show the world, and the shadow, the parts we hide. He suggested that integration, not repression, is the key to wholeness. In modern psychology, internal family systems theory proposes that we are composed of sub-personalities or parts, inner children, protectors, critics, and exiles, each with its own voice, needs, and logic. According to this view, healing doesn't come from silencing these parts, but from listening to them, befriending them, making peace with the internal crowd. The paradox becomes more complex when we realize that different parts of us can hold contradictory values. One part wants to be vulnerable, another fears being hurt. One part wants adventure, another clings to safety. One part is filled with rage, another seeks forgiveness. We don't just have one mind, we have many layers, often in tension. And yet, we are expected to behave as a unified self. The world demands coherence, but inside we are a constellation of selves, sometimes aligned, sometimes in conflict. So then, who is in charge? When you say I, which part is speaking? When you make a choice, who made it? Was it the wounded part trying to stay safe, or the wise part reaching for growth? Was it the tired self, the hopeful self, the defensive self, or the dreaming one? The multiple personalities paradox doesn't imply pathology. It suggests complexity. It reminds us that the self is not a monolith. It is a community, a chorus, a dialogue, and sometimes that dialogue is messy. But the paradox deepens when we look at how we change over time. The person you were at 15 is not the person you are now. That version had different goals, beliefs, fears, and joys. And yet you refer to them as you. You say, "When I was younger, I did this," as if the self remains untouched by time. But that earlier self might disagree with who you've become. They might not even like you. And still, you carry their name, their face, their unfinished questions. This creates a tension in how we understand responsibility. Are you accountable for actions taken by a self that no longer exists? Are you allowed to change so much that you feel like someone new? Can you be held to promises made by a version of you that's now silent? The paradox challenges not just identity, but morality. Continuity becomes slippery, and yet society asks us to pretend we are one. Perhaps the reason this paradox unsettles us is because it questions the foundation of the self. If we are not one, then who is I? If identity is plural, what holds it together? Some suggest it's memory. Others say it's narrative, the story we tell about ourselves. But memory is fragile, and stories are edited. They shift. They're shaped by what we want to believe. So maybe what holds us together is not coherence, but awareness. Not a fixed identity, but a witnessing presence that can contain all the parts without collapsing into any one of them. In this view, you are not any single personality. You are the space in which they all exist. You are the awareness that watches them rise, act, speak, and fall away. The critic, the child, the dreamer, the cynic, all take the stage, but you are the theater, the witness, the one who listens, even when the voices fight. This doesn't mean you must dissolve into chaos. It means you make peace with complexity. You learn to lead your inner system with compassion, not control. You allow your parts to be heard, but not to dominate. You find your center, not in singularity, but in relationship. You begin to notice patterns. Ah, this is the protector speaking. This is the part that's afraid. This is the part that wants to isolate. This is the part that hopes. You don't deny them. You don't over-identify with them. You greet them. You make room. You choose with clarity. The paradox teaches you that healing is not becoming one, it's becoming whole. Not by blending your parts into sameness, but by honoring their differences without letting them divide you. You learn to be a container, a field, a host of cells that can coexist in one breath. And when you meet someone else, someone who shifts, who contradicts themselves, who is not always consistent, you learn not to judge. You learn to listen for the parts. You stop asking, "Why are you like this?" and start asking, "What part of you is speaking right now, and what does it need?" This way of seeing softens conflict. It invites understanding. It reminds us that we are all carrying multitudes, and that the journey is not about eliminating them, but relating to them wisely. So next time you catch yourself acting out of character, pause. Don't rush to correct. I don't punish the part that showed up. Ask, who is this? Where did they learn to behave this way? What are they trying to protect? And then, listen. You may find that the part of you you've been ashamed of is simply one that hasn't been heard. That the part you've pushed away is one that once kept you safe. That every voice inside you, even the difficult ones, has something to teach. The multiple personalities paradox doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're layered, complex, alive. And the more you learn to sit with those layers, the more whole you become, not by being one person, but by becoming the kind of person who can hold many. Teletransportation paradox, copy V's. Original. You step into a machine. A voice tells you to relax. You feel no pain, just a brief shimmer. And then you open your eyes on the other side of the world. You've been teleported, perfectly. Instantly, your body is intact. Your memories, your voice, your thoughts, all feel the same. The technician congratulates you, but something lingers. A quiet question. The original you back at the launch site was scanned, copied, and destroyed. You are the copy, but you remember being the original, so you ask, am I still me? This is the teletransportation paradox, sometimes called the copy vs. original paradox, and it is one of the most profound identity puzzles in modern philosophy. Popularized by thinkers like Derek Parfit, it asks a seemingly simple question with no simple answer. If a perfect copy of you is made, identical in body, memory, personality, and thought, does that copy count as you? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. Of course it's you. It thinks like you, talks like you, remembers your childhood, craves your favorite food. If no one told you it was a copy, you'd never suspect a difference. And yet, the original was destroyed. The body, the cells, the you that stepped into the machine is gone. So what happened in between? Did you travel? Or were you simply replaced? Let's pause here. Consider the core idea. What makes you you? Is it your physical body? That changes constantly. Cells die and regenerate. Your appearance shifts. Your body is never quite the same from one moment to the next. Is it your memories? They're fragile. They fade. They distort. Two people might remember the same moment differently, even within the same mind. Is it your personality? That, too, is shaped by mood, by trauma, by time. The longer you sit with the question, the more elusive the self becomes. The teletransportation paradox pushes this uncertainty to the edge. It forces you to ask, is identity a matter of continuity or of content? If the copy is exactly like you, with no gaps, does continuity even matter? Or is the destruction of the original a kind of death, disguised by the illusion of replication? Imagine a variation. The machine makes a copy of you in Paris, but does not destroy the original in New York. Now there are two of you, both claiming to be you, both insisting they are the real one. Which one gets your relationships, your bank account, your life? If you say the one in New York is the true you, then what is the Paris version? A twin? A ghost? A new soul wearing your face? But if you say both are you, then you must accept that identity can split, multiply, that you are not a single thread, but a pattern, like a song that can be sung by more than one voice, each time sounding familiar, but never quite the same. This is where the paradox deepens, because the you in Paris feels just as real. They grieve the original's loss. They believe they survived. They will say, I remember stepping into the machine. I remember the scan. I remember the goodbye. They feel continuity. They feel selfhood. So who are we to deny it? This forces a shift in how we understand identity. Maybe the self is not something solid, but something functional, something experiential, a loop of memory, personality, and awareness that feels like continuity. Maybe what matters isn't whether you're the original, but whether you feel like you. Derek Parfit argued that identity is not what matters most. What matters is psychological continuity and connectedness. If the pattern of your thoughts continues, if the story goes on even in a new vessel, then that might be enough. In other words, survival isn't about preserving the original atoms, but preserving the mind. Still, there's a discomfort here, because we're attached to the idea of being this version, this body, this breath. If someone told you that you would be painlessly destroyed and replaced by a perfect copy who continues your life, would you agree? Many would hesitate. Some would refuse, because no matter how perfect the copy, the destruction of the original feels like death. And maybe it is. Maybe the copy lives on, but you, the subjective self experiencing this moment, do not. Maybe teletransportation is not a form of travel, but a beautiful illusion of resurrection. This leads to another troubling question. What if this is happening all the time? Every night you fall asleep. Your consciousness dissolves. You awaken with memories and a sense of continuity. But what if that's just a trick of memory? What if each time you sleep, a new version wakes up, convinced it is the same as the one before. If your consciousness were replaced every night by a copy that felt exactly the same, would you ever know? You see, the mind craves a stable self, a continuous identity, but the more we explore, the more fragile that idea becomes. The teletransportation paradox doesn't create this fragility, it reveals it. It shows us that the self we think is permanent is already stitched together from impermanent parts. But maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe identity was never about permanence. Maybe it was about presence. About being awake to your experience, even as it changes. Maybe the you that matters isn't the one who began, but the one who is here now, witnessing this thought. In that view, the copy is you, because it is present. It remembers. It cares. It continues. The original is gone, but the flame remains lit. Not the same flame, perhaps, but one that still gives light. Still, the paradox resists resolution. If identity can be copied, then is it even real? If two identical selves can exist, then what separates you from being just a sophisticated pattern, reproducible, replaceable, not unique? And yet, even a copied flame still burns. Even a second voice singing your song still fills the air with music. Maybe what matters is not who you are, but how you live. So perhaps the paradox teaches us this, that selfhood is not about being original. It's about being conscious. Not about holding tightly to one version, but about honoring the experience that flows through all versions. You are not a static object. You are a wave shaped by memory, attention, and the illusion of time. You are a pattern carried forward, and maybe that's enough. So next time you wonder what would happen if you were copied, ask yourself, would the copy still love? Would they still hope? Would they still feel the wind on their face and call it joy? If the answer is yes, then perhaps the self, however strange, however fragile, is still alive. Extended self paradox. You wake up and reach for your phone before your eyes fully open. You scroll through messages, check your calendar, glance at the weather. Without thinking, you've already used something outside of you, an object, to extend your awareness, to navigate your world. You rely on it. You might even feel lost without it. It knows your habits. It remembers what you forget. It nudges you, distracts you, soothes you. But it's not you, or is it? This is the heart of the extended self paradox, the quietly revolutionary idea that the self might not end at the skin, that who you are is not just what lies behind your eyes, but includes the tools, technologies, relationships, and environments that shape your thinking, feeling, and doing. And here's the paradox. If the self includes what's outside the body, then where do you end? Where do you begin? Traditionally, we've imagined the self as something contained, a mind housed in a brain, a soul carried by a body, a central I that thinks, decides, and acts. But the more closely we look, the more that boundary begins to blur. We offload memory to notebooks and phones. We outsource emotional regulation to routines, rituals, and relationships. We think through objects using calendars to plan, maps to navigate, calculators to decide. These things don't just help us think. They are part of how we think. Cognitive scientists Andy Clark and David Chalmers introduced this idea in 1998 in their now famous paper on the extended mind. They asked, if a man with Alzheimer's uses a notebook to remember where the museum is, and a person with perfect memory simply recalls it mentally, what's the difference? If the outcome is the same, and the external tool is functionally integrated into the cognitive process, then isn't the notebook part of the mind? Doesn't it count as part of the self? This changes everything, because it means the self is not confined to biology. It can stretch, expand, reach beyond the brain. Your mind, your identity, might include your devices, your books, your playlists, your rituals. They shape you. They hold parts of you. They are you in a distributed way. But that's where the paradox emerges. If the self can extend, then how far can it go? If your phone is part of you because it holds your memory, What about your home? Your car? Your culture? If someone deletes your digital footprint, have they erased part of yourself? If a person loses their phone and feels a loss of identity, is it because part of their self is truly gone? And deeper still, if the self is partly outside of you, then what happens when those parts change? What if your phone dies? What if a loved one you depend on leaves? What if the systems you rely on collapse? Do you change with them? Are you fragmented when those extensions vanish? The paradox forces us to face the fragility of identity. If who you are includes external scaffolding, then your self is no longer sovereign. It is interdependent, vulnerable, shaped by tools and environments you don't fully control, and yet, maybe it always was. From the moment you were born, you were extended by caregivers, language, culture. You learned to see yourself through the eyes of others. You internalized feedback, absorbed norms, shaped your thoughts in response to the world around you. The internal self is already stitched together from external threads. The paradox doesn't create that truth, it simply reveals it. Some people feel this more intensely than others. Those who rely on assistive devices. Those who feel deeply rooted in land, ancestry, or ritual. Those who grieve not just people, but places. A childhood bedroom. A tree in the park. A scent that evokes safety. These extensions are not trivial. They are memory. They are self. And yet, we often pretend otherwise. We pretend the self is a solid core, untouched, self-contained. But when our devices break, when our routines collapse, when our external anchors shift, we feel it. We lose focus. We lose rhythm. We lose something. And that something might be a piece of us. But then the paradox deepens again. Because if the self can extend to include what's outside, can it also extend into others? Is a long-term partner part of yourself? A friend who finishes your sentences? A therapist who helps you think? Are they external companions or internal extensions? If you depend on them for reflection, regulation, or understanding, are they not in some sense part of you? And if they are, then what happens when they go? When a loved one dies, it often feels like a part of you has died too. And maybe that's not just poetic language. Maybe it's cognitively, emotionally, existentially true. If they were part of how you knew yourself, if they were a mirror, a rhythm, a meaning, then their absence isn't just a loss of companionship. It's a partial unraveling of identity. The extended self paradox reveals how porous we are, how much of me lives in we, how much of our thinking lives in tools, how much of our memory lives in photographs, how much of our stability lives in spaces. But this doesn't have to be frightening. It can also be beautiful, because it means the self is not limited. It is expansive. It can grow. It can adapt. It can include more than we ever thought possible. We can become bigger than our bodies. We can weave our minds into communities, rituals, objects, and art. We can shape our selfhood consciously, building spaces that nurture us, choosing tools that support us, connecting with people who reflect us. It also means that care matters. The environments we live in matter. The technologies we use matter, not just because they affect us, but because they become part of us. If your mind extends into your phone, then how that phone works, how it distracts, nudges, or soothes, shapes who you are. If your self includes your home, then how that home feels affects your inner world. This understanding calls for gentleness, for presence, for design that respects human fragility and growth. Because when we extend ourselves into the world, we deserve to do so consciously. And yet, the paradox remains. If the self is extended, then it is also unstable. It can stretch. It can fray. It can be damaged when its extensions are lost or harmed. So how do we protect it? How do we remain whole when parts of our extended self change? Perhaps the answer lies not in holding on, but in awareness. You may not be able to control what is outside of you, but you can notice how it shapes you. You can become aware of your extensions. You can ask, what do I rely on? What tools support me? What rituals ground me? What relationships mirror me? And you can tend to those things, not as luxuries, but as living parts of yourself. You can also accept change. Extensions may come and go, but yourself is not one shape, it is a shifting pattern. You can reshape your identity gently, like clay. You can grieve the parts you lose, and invite new ones in. So next time you feel unsettled, ask yourself, what piece of me has shifted? What extension has frayed? And how can I rebuild my rhythm, not just inside, but around me? Because you are not just your brain, not just your thoughts. You are also your notebooks, your playlists, your morning tea, your chosen people. You are not a mind in a box. You are a mind in a world, and that world becomes part of you. The extended self paradox reminds us that we are never truly alone and never truly separate. Our boundaries are softer than we think, and in that softness, there is both vulnerability and vastness.